Welcome back, brothers and heretics, to Grimhammer. Tonight we're covering the lore behind the Prophet of the Night Lord Legion. Before you get the video, be sure to like, comment any videos, topics, ideas you want to see in the future. Be sure to subscribe for the Emperor or the Dark Gods. I want to thank you guys for your support. I've been killing it like usual. Now, let's get into the video.
The void spat the warship into real space, like something the galaxy had tried to choke down and failed. The eye of terror boiled behind it, a vast seething wound in the night, bleeding colours that did not exist in sane spectra. The Cadian Gate lay ahead, a choke point of hard stars and harder bastions, lit by the distant strobes of massed fleet engagements. Between those two immensities, the echo of damnation tore its way back into reality. Armour plates ground as the ancient cruiser shuddered, bleeding blue witchfire from its prow, where the warp still clung like oil. Its flanks were clothed in pennants of tanned human hide, some parchment dry and scribbled with Nostraman curses, others still supple enough that cold void had frozen the last of their leaking blood into black, glassy icicles. Chains rattled along its spine, heavy with crucified bodies in rusted shackles. Some were little more than armoured husks with shattered helms. Others were mortals, stripped and nailed to iron, their faces locked forever in soundless screams. The 8th Legion's colours were there beneath the trophies, but only in patches, glimpsed where the meat and metal ornaments left bare ceramite. Midnight blue, lightning bolts, a predator's hide beneath a butcher's apron. Deep in its armoured gut, on a bridge lit by witchlight and hololithic projections of the Cadian Gate, the Prophet screamed. Decimus strained against the restraint bands of his throne, armour grinding as servos fought his convulsions. His vision was gone, devoured by a single blinding image that was not an image at all, but a flood of futures rammed through one skull. He saw a fortress world hanging in the dark like a cracked tooth, gun rings and void stations circling it in disciplined orbits. He saw one of them, a fortress of living starstone, vast and angular and wrong, drift closer, its silhouette an insult to sane geometry. He saw that blackstone monolith impact the world's surface with the slow inevitability of a falling god. Cadia broke, not shattered at once but cracked, its mantle splitting in agonized slow motion. Continents ripped apart, oceans rose in walls of superheated steam. He heard defense lasers screaming as they fired blindly into the sky, even as the ground under their own emplacements tore itself open and swallowed them. He heard more than that. He heard voices, not as sound, as pressure, as weight, regiments on the walls, bellowing creed prayers as the earth peeled away beneath them. Civilians in habstacks, baked alive as void shields failed and orbital debris turned the atmosphere into a furnace. Officers in bunker cathedrals, choking on blood and dust as their command centers collapsed. Tens of billions dying in overlapping choruses. Every scream a nail hammered through the soft meat of his brain. Every heartbeat that stopped, another flare of white pain along the flawed gene seed lodged in the stem of his spine. The eye swelled in his inner sight, bleeding outwards. Warp storms roared through the breach where Cadia had been, washing across the stars, smothering light. The galaxy's map burned away, replaced by veins of raw immaterium, jagged across the void like black lightning. In that storm, something towered. Not a god, those he did not see. A man instead, in hulking Terminator warplate of black and gold, a demon blade in his gauntlet, its edge a saw-toothed shadow. Abaddon, the despoiler, walked unopposed through the ruin of the fortress world, his tread cracking rock and bone alike. Behind him, legions poured from the rent in reality. Heretic Astartes, warp spawn, cultists by the billion. The corpse empire screamed and broke. Light punched through the vision, clear and sharp as a monoblade. It became a figure in midnight armor, pale face half-shadowed beneath a crown of cables and scars. Talos Valkoran, soul hunter of the 8th, regarded his clone son through a veil of static and blood. Then even that image burned away, leaving only the raw, star-white agony behind Decimus's eyes. The restraints hissed and retracted. He slumped forward in his throne, sucking in breaths through his vox grill, each inhale a rasp that tasted of copper and ozone. His gauntlets bit into the throne's armrests, ceramite fingers leaving crescent dents. Around him, the bridge crew did not speak. Mortal slaves in iron collars and tech serfs, with half their faces replaced by augmetic lenses, watched from their pits and galleries, careful not to meet the prophet's gaze for long. Even the servitors, mind-shattered things nailed into their command thrones, twitched in their sockets as if some echo of that pain had reached the dead meat behind their eyes. "Translation complete," the bridgemaster said at last, voice tight. "We ride the outer currents of the Cadian Gate. No Imperial ships on an interception course." Decimus rose. The throne unlocked around him with the grinding thump of retracting bolts. He stood in the hollow silence that followed, the ship's machine spirit humming in the deck beneath his boots like a caged animal. His armor was an insult pressed together from the dead. Each plate showed knife-carved Nostraman script, running in jagged lines along ceramite that bore the scars of a dozen different marks and forges. Across his chest, the image of the Imperial Aquila had been hammered flat, wings snapped and bent back upon themselves, until the proud symbol resembled a broken insect pinned to his breastplate. Over one shoulder hung a cloak of skin gone the color of old parchment, stitched together from many bodies with thick black thread. It rustled faintly with his movements, the sound like paper tearing. Skulls and stolen helms dangled from bronze chains at his belt, some still stained with brain matter, others polished to a dull, yellowed shine. On one hip rode a double-barreled bolt gun, its casing inscribed with the name of Malkarian, the dreadnought once entombed within this warband's ranks. On the other rested a blade that had once been a thing of angelic beauty, golden and perfect. Orum's length was no longer bright. Reforging had turned its surface pale, almost silver, the metal lined with hair-fine striations where it had been reforged and fed too much blood. The sword slept in its scabbard now, but Decimus felt it sulk like a caged beast, pressing faint, eager hunger against his thigh. His helm was a studded, brutal affair, with a stylized skull for a face and winged legion crests rising from either side in an elegant, archaic sweep. Lightning bolts had been painted beneath the eye lenses, black tears running from sockets that glowed a deep, malignant red. He sealed it into place with a twist and a hiss of locking clamps. The world tinted the familiar blood red of his helm's lenses, icons and targeting runes flaring into life across his vision. "Hold our position in the shadow of the currents," he said, the vox flattening his already rough voice into something deeper, colder. "No signals, no challenges. We are a ghost in their blind spot until I say otherwise." "As you will, my lord," the bridgemaster murmured, bowing low. His brand, a flayed midnight wing, pulled taut across his throat as he did so. Decimus turned and left the bridge, walking through doors that unlocked at his approach like a ship opening wounds. The path to the flesh vault led down into the cruiser's bowels, where pict screens gave way to iron hooks and grated floors, where the scents of promethium and machine oil blurred into the stench of old blood. Pressure doors here were ornamented not with purity seals, but with tacked-on human faces, dried in expressions of exaggerated terror. The lumen strips flickered, casting shadows that seemed to flinch from his passing. The flesh vault was a cathedral to methodical cruelty. Pendants of flayed skin hung from the ceiling in slow turning, curtains stirring in the recycled air. Heavy chains lowered from overhead gantries supported racks of half-disassembled bodies, some long dead and pale, some twitching and breathing around missing limbs. The floor was slick with overlapping stains, some fresh and glistening, others dark and old, built up over centuries until they formed a carpet of coagulated sacrament. Varial worked at the center of it all, like a priest at his altar. The apothecary wore his midnight armor open at the collar, exposing augmetic cabling and scarified flesh traced with inked litanies. His helm sat on a nearby table, staring down with empty lenses as its owner leaned over the strapped-down ruin of a man. The prisoner's chest had been opened like an autopsy, ribs cracked and folded back to show the slow, glistening pulse of organs within. Lungs fluttered feebly in the stale air. The heart beat with a desperate, rabbit-fast tempo. Spurting blood around the circular saw Varial was guiding through bone. The Night Lord's gauntlets were slick up to the wrists. He hummed under his breath as he cut, the tune utterly without melody. "You are early," he said without looking up, his voice calm and rich with that strange, cultured Nostraman lilt that had survived 10,000 years of war. "The last time you screamed like that, Talos was still alive." Decimus approached the slab, boots leaving red footprints. "Cadia breaks," he said. "A blackstone fortress falls upon it. The eye vomits itself across the stars. The corpse throne's realm suffocates in its own filth." Varial nodded once, as though confirming a diagnosis. The same divergence as before, then. Higher resolution, perhaps. He dragged the saw sideways. Bone dust mingled with arterial spray. The prisoner tried to arch his back, but the restraints held. His mouth worked around a ragged attempt at a scream. Only a wet croak emerged. Varial had removed his tongue some time before. "Pulse rate reaction has increased," the apothecary remarked. "You dream of planetary death and his heart suffers for it. Remarkable." "You speak as if this is a disease," Decimus said. "It is," Varial replied. "A hereditary condition. Our Primarch had it. Talos had it. Now you do." He flicked bone fragments off the chirurgeon saw with a practiced motion. "The difference is that I am here to take notes this time." Decimus's lenses narrowed. "You strive very hard not to call it a gift." Varial finally glanced up, eyes a cool, inhuman red behind their lenses. "Gifts come from benefactors, Prophet. This came from a god who never loved us, and a father who broke himself to make a point. I prefer symptom." The prisoner's diaphragm spasmed. Bubbles of blood burst at the edges of his crushed lungs. Varial watched for a moment, then drove a reductor spike down through the exposed heart. The man jerked once. His eyes rolled. Varial held the spike in place until the last tremor faded. "Your vision will intensify as the crusade grows," the apothecary went on, matter of fact. "More paths branching, more deaths for your mind to taste. You will bleed from the nose more often. Seizures will increase. There is a non-zero chance your brain will liquefy and run out of your ears." "If that is the price," Decimus said, "then it is paid." Varial's lip curled in something that might have been amusement. "It will be others who pay it mostly. They always do." The vault doors boomed as they cycled open again. Laughter rolled in with the reek of cheap promethium and fresh slaughter. Lucarifus stalked through the hanging skins like a storm given flesh. His armor was hacked and scarred, the midnight plates almost black beneath the gore that glazed them. His jump pack's talons were caked with charred meat and twisted metal. Splashes of arterial red striped his bat-winged helm. Behind him came his raptor pack, the bleeding eyes, their trophy racks clacking with newly taken heads. "Flayer," Lucarifus grated, voice thick with static and satisfaction. "You started the fun without me." Varial gestured at the gutted corpse with a bloodied hand. "You were busy, I assumed. How many this time?" Lucarifus chuckled, a sound like rocks grinding. "I lost count when the deck gave way. Some void station above the gate, navy rats, dock workers, priests. They burned nicely when the reactors went." He unhooked a severed arm from his shoulder rack and tossed it onto Varial's table. Imperial Navy tattoos showed along its length, distorted by bruising. 2 of the fingers were missing. The stump ends looked chewed. "I brought you a sample," Lucarifus said. "I hear you require such things to keep the Prophet functional." Varial looked down at the arm, then up at Decimus. "It is not the corpse matter that stirs him," he said. "It is the moment before it becomes corpse matter. The scream, not the silence afterwards." Lucarifus tilted his helm. "We did our best to wake him then. The Vox net was full of them. I could hear them even over the gunfire. Every corridor, every deck, a choir of begging little voices. "You were unnecessary," Decimus said. It was not a rebuke, simply a statement. "And yet," Lucoriphus replied, spreading his arms, "here we are. You woke, the ship shook, the bridge voxed that the prophet was shrieking again. I take that as proof that I am good at my work." His lenses flared as he leaned in, almost close enough to bump helms. "What did you see this time, little hunter? The same broken world, the same glorious storm. The end of Cadia," Decimus said. "The opening of a corridor for the damned. Our father's prophecy made meat." Lucoriphus laughed softly. "Then the long war finally becomes interesting." Decimus turned away from the slab. "Muster the warband," he said. "Atramenta in full plate, raptor packs, refueled, gun crews at readiness, serfs at parade. We will walk our decks and see what tools remain to us." It took time to bring the Echo fully awake. Even now, millennia since its capture from the Blood Angels and subsequent corruption, its vastness could swallow entire regiments in its holds. Decimus walked the mustering decks as they filled. Atramenta terminators stood like statues along the spine of one cavernous bay, armor the color of night cliffs, helm crests spiked with trophies. Tusks jutted from some faceplates. Others bore leering skulls or demonic visages. Their stormbolters hung heavy on their gauntlets. Ammo feeds snaking back to drums on their backs. Chain fists and power claws crackled faintly, teeth and blades wet with machine oil and old blood. Raptors occupied the gantries above, crouched like carrion birds on iron beams. Jump packs purring, taloned boots scraping sparks. Lucoriphus moved among them, helmeted head turning to follow Decimus's path, amusement in every tilt of his skull mask. Gunclaws of line Astartes stood in ranked squads, bolters maglocked to their chests, chainswords at their hips. Lightning patterns crawled along their armor. Scarification and brands showed on the bare sections of their pale, corpse-white faces. Esoteric tech cults scuttled in the shadows between the giants, robed figures half machine, half meat, their mechadendrites tipped with drills and vials. Their eyes, those that had them, were milky and unfocused. Their devotion was not to any god, but to the wounded machine spirit of the Echo herself, and beneath it all, like a writhing carpet, the mortal serfs. They stood in loose masses along the bay edges, clad in chains, slave brands burned into their flesh. Some had flayed backs where botched attempts at escape had been corrected. Others wore masks made from the faces of dead officers, their own expressions hidden behind stitched-on horror. Each clutched a tool, a laser gun, a shell, a data slate, their worth measured only by the uses to which they could be put. They cheered as Decimus passed, not out of love, out of fear. It sounded the same. A veteran stepped forward as he approached the central strategium dais, armor scabbed with repair work. His bare head was a mass of old scars, one eye replaced with a crude augmetic. Lightning tattoos ran down his throat and across his jaw. "War Captain Korath," the veteran announced himself, slamming a gauntlet against his chest. "You called the muster prophet. What prey have you seen for us?" "Not prey," Korath answered his own question, before Decimus could speak. "Targets of opportunity. The gate is clogged with Imperial traffic, refugee vessels, Munitorum convoys, escorts. We should take a claw of strikecraft, cut out their throats, and run before the Black Legion notices. Easy kills, rich pickings." A murmur of hungry assent rolled through the gathered Night Lords. The idea sang to an old, simple instinct: pirate, plunder, flee. Decimus let it hang for a moment. Let them taste that imagined blood. Then he spoke. "Plunder," he said, "is for those who measure victory in cargo holds and slave tallies." Korath's good eye narrowed. "And how do you measure it, prophet?" "In echoes," Decimus replied. "In how long the fear lasts after we leave." He stepped up onto the strategium dais, staring out across the bay at his assembled killers. You all remember Nostramo. You remember what our father made of that wretched world. One city at a time, he carved his justice into their nerves until the thought of the Night Haunter kept them compliant while he was light years away. He raised Aurum a fraction out of its scabbard. The blade's edge caught the lumen strips, throwing back a pale, hungry shine. Conrad Kurz did not merely kill, Decimus said. He taught, every atrocity a lesson, every body a sigil. We have forgotten that. We have become raiders, not reapers. We take and we run. The galaxy screams for a night of knives, and we give it petty piracy. Korath snorted. You talk like a priest. We are not missionaries. We are murderers. We are both, Decimus answered. And I will prove it. There is an orbital outpost clinging to the gate's fringe, a listening post and resupply station. Small, poorly defended. It is of no consequence to the despoiler's main assault. It is everything to the men and women who shelter inside it and trust in its walls. He turned his helm, lenses fixing on Korath. We will take it, not for its stores, for its screams. Lucarifus laughed, Vox relays crackling his joy to every helm on the deck. Now you speak my language, Prophet. They came in low and silent, like wolves sliding through underbrush. The Imperial outpost hung in the void, a cobbled construction of habrings, antennae, and shield generators. Its void shields were low, power bled into external, sensors to watch the burgeoning storm near Cadia. Its patrol craft were scattered, escorting convoys or running picket lines on pre-programmed paths. Its gunners were half asleep, trusting Auspex screens and machine spirits to wake them in time. The echo of damnation drifted in on cold engines, void shields held tight against its hull, silhouette lost in the shifting glare of the distant eye. Boarding torpedoes launched from its flanks, drifting for long, silent moments before their engines flared. The first impact punched through the outpost's outer hull near a docking spine, folding metal like paper. The second slammed into a sensor dome. The third drove straight into the main spine, ploughing a tunnel that belched atmosphere, bodies, and twisted debris into the void. Decimus felt every jolt through his boots. His world narrowed to the coffin space of the boarding torpedo, the red of his lenses, the dim thrum of the engine around him. Icons crawled at the edge of his vision, counting down milliseconds to impact, tracking the life signs of the warriors crammed into the launch shell with him. He knew, with the same certainty with which he knew his own name, who among them would die in the next minutes. He saw one's helm shatter under a lucky last shot. Another's vitals spike and then flatline as a plasma coil overheated. A third torn in half by a mistimed blast door. 3 futures, so clear he could almost taste the copper on his tongue. He did not warn them. The torpedo hit. Ceramite screamed as the breaching drill spun, chewing through armor plating and interior bulkheads. Warning klaxons bellowed through the station, a late panicked wail. The charge blew. The boarding claw's front iris blossomed open. Decimus led the charge into the light. Gravity came back all at once when his boots found deck. The corridor ahead was a chaos of smoke, alarms, and bobbing lumen globes. Imperial Navy armsmen scrambled in the confusion, some still in their bunk suits, others half-armored, boots unlaced, eyes wide. He moved like a blade driven by a steady hand. Lasfire cracked, spitting thin strands of light through the churned air. To his sight, they were already history. He sidestepped shots that had not yet been fired, feeling the heat of them a heartbeat before they hissed past his pauldron. He raised Malkarian's double-barreled bolter and stitched rounds into men who were still in the act of shouldering their weapons. Armor and bone exploded together. One armsman's chest vanished in a blossom of pulverized ribs and shredded organs, the force of the detonation tearing both his arms from their sockets and spinning his torso down the corridor like a bloody comet. Another took a bolt at the hip. His pelvis disintegrated, and his legs separated, flipping end over end, connected only by ripped entrails. Night Lords poured through the breach behind their prophet, bolters roaring, chain blades coughing to life. The corridor filled. with meat and metal fragments, the air thickening into a choking mist of blood. Decimus waded through it, Aurum in his hand now, the relic blade singing as it bit. He took a sergeant's head with a sideways cut, the sword's edge gliding through carapace armor, bone and brain as though through water, the severed skull pinwheeled away trailing a streamer of spinal cord. Another man tried to run. Decimus stepped past him in a blur, and the man's body came apart in chunks, limbs dropping in a loose circle while his torso slid down the wall, leaving a long smear of crimson and pink. He felt a shot that would have taken Lucarifus in the throat. Before the trigger was pulled, he shifted left, shoulder-checking the raptor out of the way. The last bolt passed through the gap where his head had been and took the firing naval officer in the face instead, bursting his skull like overripe fruit. Bone shards clattered against Decimus's helm. By the time the outpost defenders had organized a meaningful response, it was already over. Deck by deck, chamber by chamber, the Night Lords butchered their way through the station. Hatches welded shut became ovens when flamers were turned on them. Barricades became killing grounds. Men who fled found the doors they ran for already sealed, their key runes overridden. They died hammering their fists bloody on bulkheads, while chain blades chewed their spines open from behind. Decimus directed it all with detached, almost bored efficiency. He did not need Auspex readouts to know where the last pockets of resistance were. He felt them, tiny bright sparks in his mind's eye, fluttering with panic. When the screams finally dwindled, he set his warband to work. The main transit artery became a gallery. He had them string the bodies up by their tendons, arms spread, legs splayed, a forest of skinned forms swaying gently in the station's artificial gravity. Bowels were opened and drawn out, intestines stretched along walls, and bulkheads in looping, glistening strokes. Hearts were nailed to the deck in careful patterns. Skulls were split, and their contents smeared in spirals on the ceiling. He oversaw it like an artist. "Here," he told one serf, guiding the man's shaking hands as he painted with a severed liver on the far wall. "Curve the line." "Yes." So the rune completes. Fear in the old tongue. The next one beside it means night. They will see this and know what came for them. By the time they were done, the corridor no longer looked like a place built for humans at all. It looked like the inside of some vast, disemboweled beast, ribs a forest of hanging bones, viscera strewn as offerings. There was one survivor. He found the man in a maintenance alcove, half crushed under fallen ducting, one leg trapped at the thigh. The armsman's breaths came in wet, bubbling gasps. His laser gun lay broken nearby. His eyes, white all the way around, fixed on the approaching demigod in midnight armor. He tried to pray. Only a hoarse rattle came out. Decimus stepped into the alcove, Aurum idle at his side. Behind him, the lumen strips flickered, casting the blood runes on the walls into shifting, writhing motion. He reached up with one hand and unlocked his helm. The seals hissed. Cold air kissed scarred skin. He removed the helm slowly and looked down at the broken man with a face too young for the armor it rode above, pale and unlined, eyes dark and utterly without pity. "My name is Decimus," he said, voice no longer flattened by the vox. "The prophet of the 8th Legion." The armsman tried to answer. Blood ran from the corners of his mouth instead. Tears carved clean tracks down his grime-streaked cheeks. Decimus watched him for a moment longer, as if waiting to see if any words worth hearing would emerge. When they did not, he reversed Aurum in his grip and drove the relic blade down through the man's chest, pinning him to the deck. The dying breath came out as a long, broken sigh. He left the sword there for a time, letting it drink. The station drifted by the time the Night Lords withdrew, its life support smashed, its beacon arrays reconfigured to transmit the last recorded screams on endless loop. It was a warning buoy now, a little shrine of terror on the edge of the gate. Back aboard the Echo of Damnation, Decimus returned to his throne. The restraints clamped home around him. Data streams unfurled before his eyes. Fleet movements, astropathic whispers, the slow turning of warp currents. Varial's last remark about liquefied brains lingered somewhere at the back of his mind. Unimportant. A Vox rune blinked on his display. Not the harsh, clean pulse of Imperial transmission. Something older, dirtier. The sound of it was wrong, like maggots chewing inside a skull. He opened the channel. A voice whispered into the bridge. It spoke in coarse Nostraman, though the accent belonged to nowhere and no one. Each syllable crawled with background static that sounded disconcertingly like distant sobbing. "Children of the night," it breathed. "Lords of terror, you are summoned." Images came with the words, unbidden and unwanted. A corpse moon hanging in the shadow of the eye, its surface crusted with ossuaries and spires of fused bone. Warships gathered around it like carrion birds, thunderhawks and stormbirds crossing its broken skies. Night lords from 100 splintered warbands walking into a single vast chamber lit by lightning. Decimus saw them die. He saw one cut in half by a raging Terminator, another thrown from a bone tower, his jump pack sputtering as he fell. Yet another nailed alive to a wall of skulls, his armor slowly peeled away by laughing brothers. Every death came with a time and a context, an intricate web of cause and consequence that laced through the coming storm of the 13th Black Crusade. He had seen this before, in flashes and fragments. Now the paths converged. "The Eighth gather," the demon-tainted voice whispered. "Conclave on the corpse moon of Tsagualsa's shadow. Decide your part in the long night to come." The rune guttered out. Silence returned. On the bridge, the crew shifted uneasily. They had not heard the details, but they had seen their prophet go still and tense, lenses burning, as if tasting something sour. "Set a course," Decimus said at last. His voice was soft and utterly sure. "Bring us to the corpse moon. There is a gathering of our kindred, and I have long known which of them are destined to leave it only as stains on the floor." The echo of damnation turned slowly, prows swinging toward the deepening madness of the eye, engines flaring to life with a hungry growl. In his throne, shackled in midnight, Decimus closed his eyes and let the next wave of futures break against him. The corpse moon hung in the shadow of the eye like a fragment of a dead god's tooth. It had once been a world, perhaps. Once it had known oceans, sky, weather. Now its surface was a diseased scab of craters and fused bone. Ossuaries sprawled over the pitted rock in overlapping plates, as if some immense creature had tried to armor the moon with skulls and failed halfway through, leaving ribs of ivory jutting from seas of grey regolith. Towers of packed femurs rose around the deeper craters, their sides mortared with powdered marrow. Above that charnel shell, Night Lord's ships circled. Strike cruisers and murder barges drifted around the moon like vultures waiting for something larger to die. Their hulls were dark, void shields turned down to minimum power, studded with crucified shapes and rusted chains. Lightning from the swollen eye strobed across their flanks, briefly catching the midnight blue and lightning bolts beneath the trophies. Prison hulks burned here and there, their atmospheres vented, their populations reduced to glittering clouds of frozen meat and ice. The glow of those slow, dying fires painted the underside of the gathered fleet in hellish hues. The echo of damnation threaded its way through that graveyard sky and came to rest above a yawning crater lined with sharpened bone. Thunderhawks and stormbirds ferried the warlords down. Decimus rode in silence. The gunship's interior throbbed with the pulse of its engines and the low mutter of caged machine spirits. Red runes crawled along the interior plating, marking course, altitude, weapon status. Serfs clung to the handholds along the walls, heads bowed, lips moving in silent, blasphemous litanies. Atramenta terminators stood at the rear like a moving wall of ceramite. Lucoriphus and his raptors paced restlessly, jump packs growling with restrained hunger. Varial sat opposite Decimus, helm cradled in the crook of one arm, eyes half-lidded in his scarred face. "This is a mistake," the apothecary said over the engine noise, conversational as though commenting on the quality of the air. "Gathering this many of our kind in one place. It offends probability. Someone will start a fight, someone else will escalate. Before long, the moon is dust and the fleet is scattered." Lucoriphus chuckled. "Sounds like a good party." Decimus rested his gauntlets on Auram's hilt, where it jutted from his scabbard. The relic sword seemed to hum faintly under his fingers, tasting the prospect of blood. "They will not destroy this place," he said. "Not yet." Varial flicked him a look. "You have seen that." "I have," Decimus answered. "I have also seen which of them walk away and which die in the dirt." Lucoriphus snorted. "Then make a list. I can start laying bets now." The gunship shook as it entered the crater's throat. External pict feeds showed the flanks of bone towers sliding past, skulls grinning in their thousands. The landing zone yawned ahead, an arena hollowed out of the moon's stone, its floor covered in packed ash and reddish sand. Other gunships were already down, their engines whining as they cycled. Night Lord squads disembarked in waves, armor crackling in the electric air. Warband banners hung from their backspikes and trophy poles, each a variation on the same themes: flayed skin, lightning bolts, broken birds of the corpse emperor. The Thunderhawk settled with a juddering thump. Ramp pistons hissed. The world outside flooded in, cold, dry air with a tang of grave dust, the roar of engines, vox-barked orders, laughter like knives scraping stone. Decimus descended into an arena full of predators. Bone columns ringed the crater's floor, some carved into twisted facsimiles of Nostroman architecture. At their bases, fire pits burned with corpse fat, giving off greasy smoke that clung to everything. The sand underfoot was not sand at all, but ground bone and rust. In the stands hacked into the rock walls, Night Lords already massed, sitting or standing in loose knots, weapons slung, helms off in. Many cases to show pale faces carved by old scars and newer brands. They watched the new arrivals with a shared, hungry interest. In another legion, these would have been allies. Here, they were competitors who had not yet begun killing one another. War Captain Korath fell in at Decimus's shoulder, Atramentar looming behind. Varial took his place on the other side, Lucoriphus and his raptors fanning out like a living shadow, talons scraping the bone as they walked. The other lords were already at the arena's center. Zar Tavik stood like a tower of midnight iron, his armor augmented by slabs of additional plating, Gothic arches cast into his pauldrons like the buttresses of a cathedral. His skull helm was crowned with a circlet of fused vertebrae. A pair of flayed commissars hung from hooks at his belt, their uniforms stitched to their skin. His warband clustered behind him, chain axes and heavy bolters held ready, a wedge of impatience. Calyx was leaner, his armor of an older, Mark, chased with fine lightning patterns that had been repaired and repainted so many times, the underlying ceramite was scarred with history. His helm hung at his hip, revealing a face like a Nostroman knife. Narrow, pale, eyes such a dark blue they were almost black. His trophies were subtle, small bones and articulated finger joints woven through his hair in tight braids. Dargier was a walking atrocity. His armor had grown baroque over time, sprouting curving horns and ridges where the warp had caressed it. Chains crisscrossed his chest, securing a dozen severed heads in a rough coat over his torso. Their faces had been peeled off and reattached in wrong configurations, eyes where mouths should be, teeth instead of eyelids. They muttered to themselves in broken, stuttering vox tones. Toriel the White-Handed lived up to his name. His gauntlets were bone white to the elbow, the colour not paint but calcified residue from too much close work. Rumour said he never used a blade if he could reach a man's throat with his fingers. The rest of his armour was a deep, dark blue, almost indistinguishable from black, lightning bolts etched with precise, elegant strokes, cleaner than most. They turned as Decimus approached. "The whelp arrives," Zartavik rumbled through his grill. "Late, as a child should be, so that his elders can decide matters without him first." "Perhaps he had to nap," Toriel said mildly. His unhelmed face was thin and hawk-like, his eyes amused. "Visions must be tiring." Laughter rolled around the arena. Some of it came from the stands, some came from the lords themselves. Decimus stopped an arm's length from them. Aurum rode at his side, Malkarion's twin-barreled bolter on the other hip, his cloak of stitched skins trailing behind him. He removed his helm with an easy twist, letting the corpse moon's sour air touch his face. He did not smile. "Zartavik," he said. "Calex, Dargia, Toriel." He nodded to each in turn. Voice calm, eyes cold. "You came when called. Good. It suggests you are not entirely stupid." Dargia's heads muttered and hissed, vox grills crackling. One of them managed something like coherent speech, a static-wrapped snarl. "You called nothing, little prophet. The summons came from deeper in the eye, from those who whisper to the despoiler. You are here like the rest of us, a dog invited to a feast." "Dogs do not feast," Lucoriphus put in from the side. "Dogs fight under the table for bones." He tilted his helm slightly, lenses glittering. "We are not dogs." "Some of us are," Varial murmured. "Some are rats, some are carrion birds. A legion is a menagerie when it gets this old." Toriel's white hands flexed. "You claim title that does not belong to you, Decimus," he said. "Prophet of the Eighth, heir to Nostramo, heir to our father. Big words for a child spliced together from stolen flesh." "From Talos's flesh," Decimus corrected quietly. "Soul hunter of the 8th Legion, last true prophet before the night fell quiet. You remember him." Calex's dark eyes flickered. "We remember his corpse," he said. "We remember his stormbird burning over Tsagualsa. We remember his body broken on its stones. You are not him." "No," Decimus agreed. "I am not. I am worse." Varial stepped a little closer, letting his armor's Medicae sigils catch the light. "I was there when Talos fell," he said, tone as clinical as ever. "I harvested his gene seed myself from the wreckage. I grew this one in a tube with my own hands. If you doubt his blood, you doubt my work." Zartavik bared his teeth behind his grill. "You expect us to kneel because an apothecary says his experiment is legitimate?" "I expect nothing," Decimus said. "I foresee." Toriel snorted. "Then foresee this, prophet. How many of us are going to die at this farce of a gathering while we argue over whose ego is the prettiest?" In the stands above, captains and champions settled in to watch. Some produced strips of tanned skin and stylus blades, beginning to scrawl wagers in curling script. Names, odds, creative profanity. Lucoriphus leaned back against a bone column, folding his arms, helm tipped, as if listening to the murmurs around him. "Two on Dargia losing his temper first," he said over a private Vox channel to Korath. "One on Zartavik trying to strangle someone with their own intestines before this is done. 10 on someone blowing up the arena by accident." Korath's augmetic eye whirred. "Odds? Bad," Lucoriphus replied cheerfully. "We are very predictable animals." The convocation of lords expanded as more Night Lords drifted into the circle's edge. Arguments broke out almost immediately, like sparks catching dry tinder. Some spoke in favor of Abaddon, the despoiler. The Warmaster had cracked the gate before. He had broken fortress worlds, toppled sector capitals, bled the Corpse Empire. With this crusade, some said, he would finally rip the heart from the Imperium's carcass and feed it to the gods. March with him, they argued, and share in that glory. Take tithes from the ruin. Others scoffed at the idea of fealty. The Black Legion had its own gods, they said, its own favors. To march under Abaddon's banner was to become a pawn in a game played by beings who thought in epochs rather than lives. Better to slip through the chaos, to cut and run, to raid shipping lanes and undefended worlds while the Corpse Empire's attention was fixed on the spear. Zartavik thundered about duty to the Primarch's legacy, twisting it into justification for more open slaughter. Darja shrieked blasphemies about feeding the warp. Kalex spoke soft poison words about independence, about the Eighth as its own storm, not a drop in another man's tide. Toriel watched it all with a faint, amused smile, white hands clasped loosely behind his back, as if waiting for the first swing. Decimus listened. He heard their words, yes. But beneath them, he heard something else, the ticking of possible futures. He saw the lords who would die in Abaddon's shadow, loyal and unremembered. He saw those who would flee, yapping into the dark, and be hunted down by Imperial retribution later. He saw strands of fate tangling, twisting, snapping. Someone invoked Conrad Kurz, voice raised, calling on the Night Haunter's name as justification for terror without direction. Someone else snarled that Kurz was dead, that his corpse had rotted on an alien throne and his prophecies were old blood on an older floor. Something in Decimus's skull cracked. He did not feel his knees hit the bone sand. Later, others would say he dropped like a puppet with its strings cut. To him, it was a sense of being unmoored, of the arena tilting away, of light pouring in through a hole in the world. The voices around him became echo. The fire pits, the crackle faded. The eye above, seen through the arena's open mouth, swelled until it filled everything. Cadia hung there again, wreathed in fire now. Blackstone struck its surface, chewing deep, splitting crust and mantle. The sky over its bastions burned from horizon to horizon. Its orbitals fell like burning teeth. Abaddon walked through the ruin, the taloned silhouette of his demon blade cutting a jagged line through the smoke. Around him marched the Black Legion, warbands of countless other legions trailing in their wake, banners of blood crusades snapping in the mad gale. Sorcerers tore holes in reality, demons poured through. The Corpse Emperor's armies broke and burned. The Cadian Gate went with it. The stable passage ruptured, becoming a hemorrhage. Warp storms roared out, tidal waves of unreality rushing through the corridors of space. Stars winked out, swallowed by the oncoming dark. Whole sectors screamed as reality came apart along wounds that had been waiting millennia to reopen. The galaxy split like something rotten. A scar of pure, roiling warp tore from the eye's swollen edge, lashing across the galactic plane. Worlds along its path were swallowed whole, their populations erased in an instant or worse, left stranded in pockets of time that stretched and twisted until insanity became the only constant. The Imperium staggered, crippled, severed from itself. It was beautiful. Decimus tasted ash and hot metal. He tasted the copper flick of 10 billion last breaths. He felt his own spine arc, muscles locking, his fingers gouging trenches in the arena dirt. He saw something beyond that storm. A cluster of systems lost in the dark, cut adrift by the scar. Worlds that once had known the Corpse Emperor's light now suffocating in pitch night. On their surfaces, bat-winged shadows moved. Night Lord's banners hung from palace spires, lightning motifs stitched in flayed skin. Populations cowered under curfews enforced by aerial hunts and public flayings, an empire of fear staked out in the corpse of the Imperium. He heard laughter, his own, Kurz's, Talos's, impossible to tell apart. The vision broke. He found himself on his back, staring up at the bruise-coloured sky, breath coming in ragged pools. His nose bled, red on pale skin. His eyes burned, as if something had tried to climb out of them. The arena was silent. Hundreds of Night Lords stood stock still, watching. The only sound was the crackle of the fires and the faint grinding of someone's gauntlets tightening. Varial knelt at his side, fingers on his throat, checking pulse, lips moving as he muttered readings to himself. Decimus batted his hands away and pushed himself upright. "Stay down," Varial hissed under his breath. "Your brain is boiling again." Decimus ignored him. He got his feet under him and rose, swaying only once. Blood dripped from his nose and ran in thin trails down his chin. He did not wipe it away. Zartavik snorted. "So the Prophet has one of his fits," the huge warlord rumbled. "And?" Decimus looked at him. "When Cadia dies," he said, voice low but carrying in the hush, "you will be standing on the bridge of your ship, demanding the warp behave like a slave. You will be cursing Abaddon for breaking the gate in a way you cannot navigate. A moment later, a wave will hit you. Your void shields will burn out. Your hull will twist. Your spine will snap against the chair as gravity forgets which way is down. You will live long enough to drown in your own blood." Zartavik's helm tilted a fraction. Decimus turned his head, slowly, deliberately, fixing each of the other lords in turn with that raw, bleeding stare. "Calyx," he said, "you will go hunting along a false corridor, chasing refugee ships fleeing the scar. You will find nothing but ghost signals and broken hulls. When you try to turn back, the storm will close. Your fleet will be stranded in a pocket of time that loops. You will fight the same battle again and again until your crews eat each other and your gods forget your name." Calyx's jaw tightened. "Dargier," Decimus went on, ignoring the hissed curses from the mutant warlord's stitched heads. "You will throw your warband into Abaddon's wake, begging for a place at his heel. You will get it. You will lead a boarding action against an Imperial flagship. A loyalist Astartes will take your head with a single cut. Your body will stagger another few paces before it realizes it is dead." Darger's heads all shrieked at once, vox grills blaring static. "Toriel," Decimus said softly, "you will try to remain neutral. You will say, as you always do, that you serve only fear. You will carve your name into a dozen worlds' worth of backs. One day, an Inquisitor will catch you in an underhive somewhere forgotten. He will not kill you quickly. He will take your hands first and feed them to you." Silence. No one moved. Up, in the stands, Lucoriphus exhaled slowly. "Well," he muttered to Korath, "that is going to hurt my wages." Korath's organic eyes shone with something like cold admiration. "Depends whom you bet on." "You lie," Dargier spat. "You cough up nightmares and call them visions." Decimus stepped down into the center of the circle, feeling the sand grind under his boots. "Call them what you like," he said. "I have seen you all die. I have seen the paths that lead there. Your blood is a footnote in a storm that does not care whether you exist." Zartavik's gauntlet squealed as his fingers tightened on the haft of his chain axe. "I will not be lectured on my death by a lab-grown whelp," he growled. "You wear another man's face and claim it as your own. You speak our father's name as if you knew him. You dare to tell me how I die." The big warlord took a step forward, then another. "Enough," Toriel began, his white hands spread. Zartavik shoved him aside with a contemptuous sweep of one arm. Toriel staggered, boots furrowing the bone sand, but did not fall. "I will gut you here, little prophet," Zartavik roared, chain axe roaring to life in his hands, teeth whining. "Let us see if you saw that coming." He charged. To the watching lords, it was a thunderclap of movement, a slab of midnight iron hurtling across the arena, weapons screaming, sand spraying under heavy boots. To Decimus, it was slower. He saw the angle of the first swing, the way Zartavik's shoulder rolled, the shift of weight. He saw the follow-through, the overcommitment, the exposed joint. He saw half a dozen futures where he stepped left, right, back, forward. He chose one. The chain axe came down in a blazing arc aimed to split his skull. He was not there. He had already moved, stepping inside the swing, feeling the teeth scrape a spark-spitting line along his pauldron instead of taking his head. Aurum came up, pale blade. Snapping free of its scabbard, he cut at the elbow. Zartavik's forearm spun away, trailing a gout of blackened blood and shreds of augmetic cabling. The chain axe flew from nerveless fingers, teeth still whining as it arced away to bury itself in the arena floor. The big warlord bellowed through his grill and swung his other fist in a hulking backhand aimed at Decimus's helm. The prophet ducked under it, stepping past again, blade flicking. He took the tendons behind Zartavik's knee. A second later, he took the other. The bigger Astartes dropped with a crash. Massive frame driven to one knee by the suddenly useless joints. Decimus walked around him, calm as a surgeon. The crowd roared now, a savage chorus from the stands, weapons lifted, fists hammering against armor. Lucarifus laughed, a harsh bark, the sound edged with genuine delight. "Bleed him!" someone shouted. "Make him see it coming!" Zartavik struggled to turn, to bring his bulk around to face his foe. Decimus stepped lightly out of his reach, reading every desperate motion like a page. "You die on your bridge," he said conversationally, as he sliced through the cabling at the back of Zartavik's helm, severing power feeds. "You choke on your own blood as your ship breaks its spine." He drove Aurum through Zartavik's other elbow joint, punching the blade out through the inside of the warlord's arm. The limb flopped uselessly. Armor plates buckled. "You are not on your bridge now," Decimus went on. "You have a chance to die better than I have seen for you." He stepped in close, chest to chest, boots grinding on shattered bone. He reached up and ripped Zartavik's helm free, exposing the brutalized, scarred face beneath. The older Astartes' eyes burned with fury and something else now. Fear, buried deep. Decimus held his gaze. "For once," he said quietly, "I offer you an option you did not have in my vision." He reversed Aurum and drove, the relic blade down through Zartavik's sternum, angling it so that it slid between ribs, pulped heart, and pinned the big warlord to the ground. Blood fountained, hot and thick, splashing Decimus's face, jetting up in rhythmic bursts that slowed, then stopped. Zartavik sagged. His gaze did not drop from Decimus's face until the light went out of it. The arena erupted. Night Lords bellowed, some in rage, some in savage joy. Weapons were raised, points shifting toward Decimus and away again as minds calculated risk. Dargia's heads wailed. Calyx watched with narrowed eyes. Toriel flexed his white hands and smiled thinly. "Consider," Decimus said, wiping his face with the back of his gauntlet. Blood streaked his pale skin, mingling with the drying trickle from his nose. His eyes were fever bright. "I told him how he would die. I gave him the chance to defy it. He took it and fell differently." He planted Aurum's tip in the sand and leaned on the hilt, looking around the circle. "You want to throw your strength behind the despoiler. Do so. I will not stop you. You want to slink away into the dark and pretend the storm does not touch you. Do so. I will not chase you. But you know now what I am. You have seen it." He gestured vaguely towards Zartavik's corpse. "I walk the shores of a river you cannot see. I watch where you all step. I know where the stones are and where the water is deep. You can ignore me. You can spit on my blood. You can call me liar." He smiled then, a slight humorless tilt of the lips. "Or you can accept that a guide who knows where the whirlpools lie is worth listening to." Toriel's gaze flicked to the dead warlord. "You would lead us then?" he asked softly. "Turn the Eighth into a crusade in its own right?" "No," Decimus said. "I would point. You will do as you always do. Kill, flay, terrorize. But you will do it where it matters." "And where is that?" Calyx asked, voice like poison smoke. "Cadia, the gate, the War Master's shadow." Decimus's lenses flickered as he locked his helm back into place. When he spoke again, the vox gave his words a metallic edge. "Not Cadia," he said. "That world is already dead in my eyes. Whatever you do there, whoever you kill, its fate is sealed. The scream will be brief and bright, then drowned by the roar of the warp." He looked past them all, as if seeing something none of them could. "There is a fortress Hive world near the gate," he went on. Helandros, population measured in tens of billions. Regiments drawn from its depths stand on Cadia's walls even now, bleeding for a world that will crack beneath their feet. He lifted Aurum from the sand and sheathed it in one smooth motion. Helandros is a throat. The corpse emperor is not watching, he said. We will cut it. We will not simply sack it. We will turn it into a shrieking altar. We will teach it fear so deep that the echo, who runs down every vox line in the sector. When Cadia falls and the scar splits the sky, the memory of Helandros burning will already have rotted the courage of those who might have stood in the ruins. He spread his hands. Come with me, he said. Or do not. But remember this moment when the storm breaks and you are drowning. Remember whose warning you laughed at while you still had throats to laugh with. One by one, some of the warlords stepped forward. Calix was first, lips twisted in a reluctant grin. I will not kneel, he said, but I will watch where you point that blade, Prophet. If your vision leads to rich killing grounds, my talons will be there. Toriel flexed his white fingers, then nodded once. I will send ships, he said. I am curious to see what you do with a world of your own to terrorize. Dargier hissed and spat and muttered to his stitched heads. In the end, even he grunted something like assent, too wary now of the detailed death he had heard described. Others followed, some more grudging than the last. Oaths were sworn, not with clasped hands and sigils, but with skin and blood. Flayed strips were cut from forearms and passed over to Varial, who marked them with runes and bound them together in a single writhing sheaf. Later, away from the arena's noise, in a bone-lined tunnel that stank of old smoke and stale fear, Varial walked at Decimus's side. You have gained yourself attention, the apothecary said mildly, not just from the 8th. Word of this will bleed out. The Black Legion listens for such things. Abaddon does not enjoy rivals, especially ones who claim to see further down the path than he does. Decimus's helm turned slightly. Let him listen. He will do more than that, Varial said. He may decide that a prophet of terror with his own private empire is an asset, or he may decide you are a threat to his story and try to erase you. Given his history, I know where I would place my wager. The War Master must reach Terra, Decimus said. Through a scarred, shrieking galaxy, he wants a road. I will give him a maze. I am not his rival. I am the weather. He can rage all he likes. Storms blow where they will. Varial considered that, lips quirking. Helandros first, then. Yes, Decimus said. Helandros first. We will crack it open and see what kind of music 40 billion dying throats can make. The corpse moon's surface groaned somewhere overhead, ancient rock protesting under the weight of ossuaries and war machines. In the distance, engines thundered as ships lifted, one after another, answering a new, darker gravity. The conclave of Carrion was over. The feast it had promised was only beginning. Colonel Marius Vecht had seen worlds die before, but never from this close, and never with so much to lose. The observation chapel of Bastion Primus jutted from the orbital ring like a gun barrel, its armor-glass wall a single curved window onto the void. Beyond it, Helandros filled half the sky, a swollen grey-blue marble veined with the artificial lights of its hives. The planet turned slowly, clouds crawling across broken continents, scars of strip mining and manufacturing belts, gleaming like metal sutures. Orbitals and defense platforms clung to the space around it in neat military rings, each node a cluster of macro cannon and missile silos, wrapped in void shields. Vecht stood with his hands clasped behind his back, boots planted apart, gaze fixed on the world below. His dress jacket was open, service cap jammed under one arm, collar undone enough to show old scars. He wore his age like a campaign ribbon. Weathered skin, close-cropped iron hair, a jaw that looked like it had been carved out of rock and then kicked a few times. On the glass before him, faint tracking runes tagged each visible ship. Bulk transports, Munitorum freighters, civilian liners repurposed as evacuation craft, their hold sardine tight with bodies. Escort squadrons flitted between them, lean Navy warships shepherding the convoys along predetermined corridors. Helandros was bleeding people into the void as fast as its lift capacity allowed, and still it was not enough. Tens of billions remained on the surface. The numbers were too big to fit comfortably into any living mind. Vect tried anyway. He pictured every small lumen on the night side as a regiment that would never leave. Every cluster of lights as a hive level already signed away. He had been Cadian-born, back when that still meant something. His youth had been grey walls and white drills, lasgun stock and marching feet. Helandros felt too large, too loud, too crowded. Even its war felt bloated. The 13th Black Crusade, the astropaths called it, voice shaking as they relayed the words. The despoiler's final throw. The death of Cadia. The breaking of the gate. The thought made his jaw clench. He turned from the window as the chapel doors hissed open behind him. "Sir." The Vox officer at the threshold snapped to attention, hand to brow. Fleet Command reports renewed contact at the outer marker. Chaos Raiders probing the line again. 17th and 43rd Squadrons engaged. No losses. Yet. Yet, Vect echoed. His voice was a dry rasp, ground down by too much shouting over battlefield noise years ago. The word of the day. "Yes, sir." He moved past the officer into the main command gallery, the observation chapel's quiet giving way to the bustle of Bastion Primus at war. Auspex pits hummed with green light. Vox operators huddled over consoles, headsets tight, faces drawn. Cogitator banks clattered, printing out endless reams of paper, each line another tick in the ledger of the crusade. Hologlyphs floated over the central table, showing fleet dispositions, orbital trajectories, predicted incursion paths. Red blurs marked known enemy vectors. There were too many. There were always too many. "Mr. Holst," Vect snapped. "Status of the ring." The Bastion's Master of Ordnance turned from his console, a heavy-set man with a face like a pugilist's and the eyes of a mathematician. "Macro batteries at 78% readiness, Colonel. Void shield stable. We have some saturation issues along the second ring's underside." He tapped at runes, bringing up a flicker of angled cross-sections. Some of the older platforms were never meant for this continuous engagement tempo. If we had another week to redistribute power couplings, and... "We do not have another week," Vect cut in. "We have a few hours and a whole lot of wishful thinking. Keep the guns hot. Rotate fire to give failing units a chance to cool if you have to, but we cannot afford gaps." "Yes, Colonel." He moved on, barking questions, listening to rapid-fire answers. Ammunition tallies, fleet casualties, Vox traffic density from the surface. Requests. For evacuation priority, stamped in red ink with the same cold refusal. Helandros would not be evacuated. Helandros would stand. That was the order from above. From Segmentum Command. From the Munitorum. From generals and admirals who could see only the neat lines on their star charts, not the hives full of breathing meat those lines represented. He agreed with them, mostly. It was a fortress world, a hive of manufactorums and regiments. You did not abandon such things lightly. You dug in. You bled the foe. You died hard. Still. He could not help the sour taste that came when he looked at the endless list of denied evacuation requests. "Vox traffic is spiking, sir," someone called out. "We are seeing bleed over from the gate. Wide spectrum. Unauthorized channels." "Jam them," Vect said. "Protocol Cadia pattern. Nothing comes through the ring without our leave." "Yes, Colonel." The officer bent to his task. Vect turned away, trusting it was handled. The first scream slid into the command gallery a few minutes later. He almost did not notice it at first. A faint, high background note, like feedback, or the death rattle of a speaker. It made the hairs along his arms rise beneath his jacket. "Holst," he said, frowning. "What was that?" The Master of Ordnance looked up from his console. "What was what, sir?" The scream rose in volume. It came from everywhere and nowhere, a thin, reedy keening that rode beneath the normal vox chatter like a parasite. Vecht saw officers wince and tug at their headsets, saw serfs in the pits shiver as if a sudden cold breeze had touched them. Emperor's bones, one tech muttered. What in the warp is that? Vox control, Vecht snapped. Trace that sound's origin and cut it. Working, sir. Hologlyphs flickered. Auspex blinked. The scream kept rising. There were other voices tangled with it now. Lower, rougher. A man shouting for help. Another chanting a litany of fire and steel. Static scratching between. Colonel, the Vox officer called, voice tight. I am shutting channels down one by one and it is still there. It is not on any specific band. It is in all of them. That is not possible, Holst blurted. Vecht's teeth ground together. Do it anyway, he said. Isolate the feed. Reroute. I do not care how. Just get it out of my command room. The Vox officer's hands flew over the controls. Rows of runes turned from green to yellow to red as channels went dark. The scream kept going. It had words now. He could almost make them out beneath the other noise. Help me, please. I do not want to die. They are in the walls. Vecht tore off his own headset. The noise dulled, but did not vanish. It was in the room, not just in the lines. This is a psychological attack, he said. Heretic Vox corruption. Stay at your posts. Ignore it. This is nothing we have not trained for. He wanted to believe that. Colonel, Holst again, voice suddenly hoarse. We are getting emergency signals from the surface. Command bunkers in Hive Gilead and Hive Moors. They report. He swallowed. They report. Flayed bodies inside sealed compartments. Entire command staff. Vecht stared at him. Repeat that. Sir, they say... Holst looked down at his console, as if the words there might make more sense. They say someone got into their inner bunkers, slaughtered the command teams, skinned them and left them hanging from the ceiling. No breach alarms were triggered, no doors opened. They just appeared. Someone in the room crossed himself. Someone else began muttering a catechism under his breath, voice shaking. The scream on the Vox shifted, warping, stretching into laughter. Get me peaked feeds, Vecht said. He could hear his own pulse in his ears. Now. Hololith projectors flickered. Grainy images wavered into being above the central table. The first showed a bunker command chamber. Red lumen strips washing everything in emergency color. Consoles and cogitators stood dark and silent. From the ceiling, 10 men dangled by their ankles, skin peeled away in long, ragged strips that draped around them like robes. Their faces had been removed entirely, leaving raw muscle and gleaming teeth. Someone had used their blood to paint symbols on the walls. Long, looping strokes that meant nothing to Vecht, but made his eyes ache when he looked at them. The second pict showed much the same, only here the hanging corpses were arranged in a crude approximation of an aquila, limbs spread, ribs shattered to form crude wings. Timestamp, Vecht ground out. Sir, they are less than 10 minutes old. 10 minutes. No breach alarms, no sensor triggers. 10 men torn out of their skins inside rooms that were supposed to be untouchable without a full bombardment. Vecht's stomach turned cold and heavy. Night Lords, he thought. Traitor Astartes. Nostraman bastards. The galaxy whispered their name around campfires and in trench foxholes. He had seen their work before in campaign logs and archived picked feeds. Skinned cities. Casualties arranged like punctuation marks. He had never expected to see their handwriting on his own command feeds. Lock down all orbital access points, he said. I want double squads at every dock, every airlock. Internal patrols in pairs with overlapping fields of fire. If any of those bastards got up here, I want them nailed to the deck before they can so much as fart. Sir, Holst said, if they can do that on the surface without setting off a single alarm, I am not sure a few more men with laser guns. I know, Vecht cut in. Do it anyway. The first hab block vanished from the surface a few hours after that. He watched it happen in fast time across a bank of picked screens. One moment the hab was there, a stack of prefab units bolted to a hive flank, lumen grids glowing, in the regular pattern of 1,000,000 lives being lived. The next, every light in it went dark at once. Sensor readings spiked. Heat, then cold, then nothing. Emergency lumens flickered to life in the surrounding structures, showing faces pressed to windows, heads craning out over rusted balconies. People, men, he told himself firmly. Men and more men, shouting questions, calling names. No answers came back. By the time ground teams forced their way inside, they found empty rooms and hallways splashed with blood and bits of meat, as if some enormous invisible chain blade had swept through the lot. There were drag marks on the floor, smears on the walls, no bodies. Vecht listened to the ground commander's report over a crackling channel, jaw clenched so hard it hurt. "The whole block gone," he said. "No survivors, no corpses." "Nothing, Colonel," the officer replied, voice brittle with strain. "Just scraps. They did not even leave us something to bury." The scream on the Vox had shifted again. It came and went in waves now, threading through regular traffic. Sometimes it was a single voice, sometimes a crowd. Once, he could have sworn he heard children crying in it, thin and high, layered under the deeper, rougher sounds. He ordered the volume turned down in the pits. It did not help much. The noise had got into his head, into all of them. On the night side, Helandros' skyline began to change. Pict feeds from orbital augers showed it first. Spires and tower tops that had once been crowded with antennae and landing pads now sported additions. Crossbeams, chains, figures hanging from them. At first it was a few dozen, then hundreds, then entire regiments. Night after night, whole platoons of the Planetary Defense Force went missing from their assigned stations. Patrols expected 1 hour at a muster point failed to report in. When search teams were sent, they found weapons scattered on the floor, blood in odd patterns, no bodies. A day later, the Pict feeds showed the missing men crucified on hab spires, their flayed forms stretched in long lines, some vertical, some at angles, some curved. From ground level, it looked like random atrocity. From orbit, Vecht saw the shape. The corpses formed looping symbols, each a letter in some jagged alphabet. The marks repeated, over and over, across the night side of the planet, so large that only someone with an orbital vantage would ever understand the language. He did not know Nostraman's script. He knew a threat when he saw it. Helandros saw it too. Every Pict feed on the planet carried the images whether authorized or not. Someone in the data stacks tried to block them. Whoever was feeding them in was better. The flayed runes supplanted normal programming. People saw them when they went to check the weather, when they tuned in for casualty updates, when they tried to distract themselves with entertainments. Fear soaked into the hive flesh of the world, like spilled oil. On the echo of damnation, Decimus watched it spread. The bridge was lit only by hollow projections and the cold glare from the eye. Helandros turned slowly below, its night side scribbled with his work. Runes of fear, of night, of inevitability. The Nostraman language was a dead tongue in the wider galaxy, but here, in this moment, it was the only one that mattered. Icons crawled in front of his eyes, units, warbands, infiltration cells, raptors, saboteur cadres clinging to the underbelly of the orbital ring like ticks. Each blink of light on his internal display was a cluster of killers perched and waiting. He saw them move before they did. Lucariphus, he voxed. Now. Third ring. Access spines alpha through delta. Garrison shift change in... He checked the ghost clock ticking in his mind. 6 minutes. Be in place. Already moving, came the Raptor's reply, laughter crackling in the line. You spoil my fun by telling me what I am doing. Before I do it, Prophet. Varial, Decimus said on another channel. How is the choir? In progress, the apothecary replied. They are tuning nicely. I have never heard this much desperation on a single wire. In the depths of the ship, in a chamber deeper than the flesh vault and colder, Varial the Flayer worked at his greatest instrument yet. The room had once been a torpedo magazine. Now its racks held different ordnance. Rows of metal frames lined the space, each the height of a man, each bristling with cables. Severed heads were clamped into them at throat and temples, jawbones wired open, teeth exposed. Some were fresh, eyes still moving, mouths working soundlessly. Others had begun to dry, lips cracking, tongues withering. All were awake. Thick cables trailed from the skulls into a central throne where an astropath sat, or rather, what was left of one. His limbs had been removed at the joints, stumps grafted into a tangle of tubing and machine. His eyes were gone. Sockets filled with polished augmetic lenses that whirred and clicked as they focused on things only he could see. His mouth was sewn shut. Breath hissed in and out through punctures cut into his throat. Varial moved among the frames, adjusting needles, tightening clamps, whispering into ears that bled. "Remember how it felt," he murmured, "when the Night Lords broke your line, when you saw your commander die, when you realized no one was coming to help you. Hold that thought." He twisted a dial. One of the heads convulsed, a gurgling noise leaking from its throat. "We are feeding their panic into the choir," he said, more formally, into his link with Decimus. "The astropath amplifies it, codes it, spills it into the ether. Every Vox unit in the system will feel it as a pressure, a wrongness. Every message will carry a flavor of it. It will itch at them, keep them from sleeping, keep them from thinking straight. Marius Vecht already cannot. Think straight," Decimus said. "He does not yet know that. Help him realize." "As you wish." The first major assault on the orbital ring began, while the scream choir tuned itself to a pitch only psychers could truly hear. Chaos ships translated in on a ragged front, their arrival marked by flashes of witchlight and ripples in the void that made Auspex screens stutter. They came in lean and hungry, murder barges and strike cruisers, and ships whose silhouettes had no right to exist in real space at all. Bastion Primus saw them at once. That much, at least, worked as it was supposed to. "Contacts!" Holst yelled. "Multiple bearing sunward, range half a light second and closing. Flag codes match known heretic designs. Elevation. Throne take them. They are coming in under the shield arc." "Plot their trajectory," Vecht snapped. "Get me firing solutions. Bring the second ring up to maximum." Macro batteries roared. The bastion shook under Vecht's boots as great shells the size of commuter habs spat from the gun mouths, burning trails across the void. Lance beams stabbed out, white-blue streaks that lit the murk. Some hit home. Chaos hulls shuddered, armor plates peeled back, fires blossomed in ruptured compartments. Not enough. The heretic ships fired as they came. Their volley was not random anger. It was careful, precise, guided by a mind that had seen this pattern play out 1,000 times before it happened. Decimus watched the tracers converge on weak points in the orbital grid. Ancient platforms whose shields had been patched and repatched. Power relays that had never been properly hardened. The joints between Bastion Primus and its sister stations. Macro shells and warp-touch torpedoes slammed into those places. Void shields flared, screamed, broke. Metal skeletons gave way. Entire nodes went dark, tumbling away in slow, lazy arcs as their grav anchors failed. On Helandros, people looked up. The sky was full of fire. Evacuation traffic shifted in tight, terrified lines, burning trails cutting across the night as transports clawed for altitude. Some made it through the killing zones, teeth clenched, drives howling. Others did not. Chaos fire found them, tore through hulls, turned passenger decks into pressure ovens. Broken ships came apart in orbit, venting bodies and oxygen in glittering streams. From the ground, it looked like new constellations forming and dying by the minute. On the orbital ring, the Night Lords made their move. Raptor packs hit Bastion Primus first, drop barges slamming into the outer hull with such force the command gallery shuddered. Bulkheads howled, seals popped. Vect heard the distant cough of emergency shutters slamming down to stop decompression. "Boarders!" someone yelled. "Multiple points along decks 5 through 10. We have breaches in the gun galleries and secondary control." "Seal them off," Vect barked. "Firing ports only. No one falls back. Without my order. I want those bastards buried under Larsen's shell." He read the casualty columns on his display. The numbers climbed too fast. Kill tallies in the thousands already, and the battle had barely begun. On Helandros' surface, war unfolded on a scale that made individual lives feel like dust motes. Astra Militarum regiments, drawn from across the sector, lined the outskirts of the Hives, trench networks stretching from horizon to horizon. Armoured columns squatted nose to tail along prepared routes. Lehman Russ hulls painted in dull greens and browns, their crews smoking, praying, or staring blankly ahead. Artillery parks glowered in the rear, basilisks and medusae already dialed in on no man's land, barrels elevated. The planetary defense forces manned the inner rings, laser guns in shaking hands, flak armor ill-fitting, officers bellowing until their voices broke. Comms chatter was a constant roar. Orders, counter-orders, requests for clarification drowned in, background noise. They never saw the Night Lords until it was already too late. The traitor Astartes did not attack in neat lines. They came in where the lines were weak. A single raptor pack dropping into a regimental command dugout, carving through officers before the men even knew their leaders were dead. A saboteur cell emerging from a sewer access, slaughtering the crew of an artillery battery and turning its guns on the trenches. A talon of Atramentar punching down a lift shaft into a hab level, leaving a shaft full of shredded meat and broken rails behind them. Every time the Imperials reacted, the Night Lords were gone, back into the dark, leaving only the echo of laughter on the comnet and picked feeds of their handiwork. Vect watched the kill tally climb in the data feeds. Tens of millions dead in the first day, if the numbers could be believed. They felt unreal, too large. But the picts of corpse piles and burning hab levels did not lie. Decimus moved through that. Chaos, like a man walking through a map only he could see. He led his chosen talon of the 8th down in a spear thrust aimed straight at the heart of Helandros' command structure. Drop pods howled through the atmosphere, metal coffins wrapped in flame. Anti-air fire reached for them, streaks of LAS and autocannon tracer cutting the sky to ribbons. Some pods bloomed into expanding balls of fire, their cargo incinerated before they ever touched dirt. Decimus's pod did not. He saw the angles of the incoming fire before it was fired. He felt the pulse of each gun battery as a faint itch in his bones. He nudged his landing thrusters a fraction of a degree at the right moments, setting his descent path in the gaps between. The impact when the pod hit the primary Hive command spire was a hammer blow. Metal shrieked, stone shattered, internal bulkheads crumpled like tin. The explosive bolts blew, hatches slamming down, ramps deploying. Decimus stepped out into a storm of shattered masonry and choking dust. The command spire's inner sanctum sprawled before him, a cathedral of data slates and hololiths. Vox pylons ringed the chamber, spitting sparks. Officers in decorated coats scrambled for weapons, faces white. A company's worth of elite guardsmen in carapace armor and stormcoats were already in motion, snapping up hellguns, forming firing lines, their sergeant's voice cutting through the confusion. "On me! Target the breach! Fire at will!" LAS fire filled the knot of space in front of the drop pods, a solid sheet of red. To human eyes, it would have been impossible to pick paths through that deadly lattice. Decimus was not human. He moved through the storm, steps precise and economical, each change of direction prefigured by knowledge rather than reflex. Bolts that would have taken him in the throat passed through the space his head had occupied a heartbeat before. Shots aimed at his chest kissed the edge of his pauldron instead. His own bolter thundered. Twin barrels vomiting explosive shells. Guard bodies disintegrated under the impacts, chests erupting, limbs torn free. One man took a bolt through his helm, the back of his skull fanned out in a wet spray, brain and bone flecking the face of the man behind him. Night Lords followed their prophet, firing as they came, chain blades howling to life. They hit the guard company like a tidal wave of steel. Decimus waded into them, Aurum in his right hand, Malkarian's relic gun in his left. He fired point blank into one man's gut, folding him backwards around the impact, then pivoted, sword rising in a gleam of pale metal to take another across the collarbone. Armor, flesh and spine parted. The upper half of the guard slid off the lower, entrails slopping out to decorate his boots. He felt bullets strike his plate, last impacts sizzling across his ablative layers. They were annoyances, not threats. The guardsmen's faces twisted in fear as they realized it. He carved a path through them, faster than they could track, every move already made in his mind before his muscles followed. When the last of them fell, the command sanctum was a slaughterhouse. Bodies lay in drifts. Some were missing limbs, some were missing heads. Some had been torn into so many pieces it was impossible to tell where one ended and another began. Blood ran in sheets down the steps to the central command dais, pooling around cogitator banks and dripping off shattered icons. Decimus walked among them, helm turning slowly. "Clear the bastion," he voxed to his talon. "Hunt for survivors. Bring me officers with insignia. Leave the rest where they fall." He strode to the highest point of the chamber, stepping over corpses and wreckage, and looked up. The ceiling was a high dome, once painted with devotional frescoes, now smoke-stained and cracked. It would serve. "Varial," he said quietly, "I need a rune." "What kind?" came the apothecary's dry reply. "A statement," Decimus said. "Prophecy. Something the ring can see when they look down. Something that says Helandros was already dead the moment they marked it on a map." He gave instructions. They were very specific. The colonel found himself at the edge of the world long before he saw Decimus. Bastion Primus was dying. The macro batteries along its spine had fallen silent one by one, either wrecked by enemy fire or overrun by boarders. Hallways that had once thrummed with ordered activity were now clogged with bodies, imperial and heretic both, sprawled in tangled heaps where they had butchered each other. The scream on the Vox had become an endless chorus. It was not just the terror engine now. It was genuine, real voices, men on the ground calling for support that would never come, officers reporting positions only to have their words cut off in wet gurgles as Night Lords reached them. Vox lines carried hallucination frequencies and weaponized whispers, lies spoken, in familiar tones. At one point, Vect had heard his own voice on the net, issuing an order he had never given, redeploying an entire regiment into an artillery kill zone. By the time he realized, 2/3 of them were dead under misdirected shells. His men were fraying. He saw it in the wild eyes, the clipped responses, the way fingers twitched on triggers. They were turning on each other in small ways. Accusations, paranoia, a sergeant putting a round into a private's back because he was sure he had seen the man's eyes glow just for a moment. The Bastion's inner command sanctum had fallen silent an hour ago. No one answered hails. All picked feeds from the primary Hive spire showed now was static and blurred shapes. Vect had gathered what remained of his personal guard and forced a path toward the last working lift. "We should fall back to the emergency defense hub," his adjutant had said. "We can still coordinate with the other bastions. We can still die somewhere that matters," Vect had interrupted. "If the primary spire has fallen, we either retake it or we make the bastards pay in blood for every step they take in it. I am not going to spend my last hours in a bunker listening to other men scream." They rode the lift down in a box full of gunmetal and sweat, laser guns clutched tight, grenades in their belts. Someone began humming an old Cadian marching song under his breath. Someone else joined in. After a few lines, the melody dissolved into bitter laughter. The doors opened onto a charnel house. The command sanctum he had seen every day for years was gone, replaced by something that had its shape but not its soul. Lumen strips flickered. Consoles lay in pieces. Blood covered every surface. At the center of the chamber, a symbol had been drawn. Not painted, drawn. Bodies had been cut into sections and laid out with horrific precision. Torsos stacked, limbs arranged in sweeping curves, heads placed where they would give the most expressive tilt to the lines. Entrails connected the pieces, intestines stretched and twisted to form looping strokes. Hearts hung from vox pylons, dripping slowly, adding dark flecks to the already sodden design. Vect did not recognize the rune, but he felt it. It seemed to press down on his lungs, to thicken the air. He could smell rot and ozone and something else, something like old fear baked into stone. His men gagged. One of them dropped to his knees and vomited. Another crossed himself so many times he nearly knocked his own cap off. "Hold," Vect said. His voice sounded thin in the vast space. He was not sure who he was trying to convince. His men, himself, the galaxy. Something moved at the top of the stairs. A shape stepped out of the gloom, each footfall solid and unhurried. Midnight armor, bat-winged helm, cloak of stitched skin. A relic blade rode at one hip, pale and hungry. A double-barreled bolter hung on the other. Lightning played along ceramite. Eyes glowed like furnace coals behind the skull mask. Vect had seen Picts of Astartes before. He had fought alongside loyalist angels of death. He knew the scale of them, the weight. He had never seen one of the 8th Legion in person. The stories did not do them justice. He raised his las pistol. It felt obscenely small. "You," he rasped. "Traitor. You did this." The skull-faced helm tilted a fraction. When the voice came, it was calm and flat, Vox Grill turning it into a measured grind. "My name is Decimus," the giant said, "prophet of the 8th Legion. This is not this. This is the first stroke of a sentence you will not live to read." His talon fanned out behind him. Night Lords in their dozens stepping into the dim light, weapons low but ready. The rune underfoot gleamed wetly. Vect swallowed sand. "Helandros will stand," he said. He did not believe it anymore. That was not the point. The Imperium has weathered worse than you. Better than you. You are one more sickness in a long list. We will cut you out. Decimus descended the blood-slick steps. "Cadia breaks," he said. "The gate falls. The corpse emperor's realm splits like rotten fruit. You are speaking from a world that is already a footnote in that saga. The only choice you have left is whether your death is meaningless or instructive." He stopped a few meters away, close enough that Vect could see his reflection warped in the giant's lenses. "Then let it be instructive," Vect said. He lifted his pistol and fired. The lasbolt flashed against Decimus's breastplate, leaving a scorch mark. The Night Lord did not so much as flinch. His gauntlet snapped out, faster than Vect's eyes could follow, and crushed the pistol like a tin toy, bones in Vect's hand cracking under the pressure. Vect screamed, dropping to one knee. His men fired. Lasguns chattered, streams of red stitching across the command sanctum. Night Lords moved, through it, some taking hits that smoked against their armor, most simply stepping aside, as if they knew where every bolt would land before it was fired. Decimus reached down, seized Vect by the front of his jacket, and hauled him up off the floor, as if he weighed nothing. "Watch," the prophet said, bringing the colonel's face close to his helm. Vect's feet kicked at air. Pain lanced up his arm. He could smell the breath coming from behind that grill, metallic and stale. Watch how a world dies when it has already been judged wanting. He turned Vect's head, forcing him to look at the rune, at the bodies that made it, at the men who had once sat at these consoles and now lay disassembled at their own feet. Then he drove his free hand into Vect's chest. Ceramite fingers punched through bone and meat, seeking the rhythm of the colonel's heart. Vect choked, eyes bulging as the Night Lord's fist closed around the hammering muscle. He felt it squeeze. Once, twice. The world went white at the edges. Decimus held him there, impaled and shaking, for a long moment. Long enough for the surviving guardsmen to see. Long enough for them to taste the helpless rage that would mark this as more than just another casualty in another war. Then he tore Vect's heart out and held it up, blood cascading down his vambrace. Helandros was already dead, he said, amplifying his voice across captured Vox channels, sending it echoing into every feed he could reach. This is merely its first breath of the long night to come. The heart twitched a few times in his grasp, then stilled. On the surface, fire bloomed. From the highest spire of the primary hive, Decimus issued his final orders for the opening movement of his symphony. The Echo of Damnation and her escorts adjusted their firing solutions, macro batteries and lance arrays cycling, targeting runes crawling across their cogitator displays. They did not aim for government palaces or manufactorum cores. Those he wanted intact, at least for now. They aimed for the lower hive levels, for habstacks and transit hubs, for places where bodies were packed as tightly as possible. Cyclonic torpedoes were too final for his purposes. He chose instead to peel the hive open. Orbital fire raked the planet. Beams of coherent light drilled through kilometers of rock and plasteel. Macro shells punched down into underhive slums and detonated with the force of small suns. Pressure waves rolled outward, turning air into knives, walls into shrapnel, people into a red mist that painted what remained. From orbit, it looked like ulcers blooming across the surface. Great circles of fire eating into the darkness, merging, flowing, until whole continents glowed. Billions died. Some in an instant, obliterated before their nerves had time to register pain. Some more slowly, trapped in collapsed tunnels, lungs filling with smoke, flesh blistering as heat bled down from the infernos. Above, some burned, some suffocated. Some were crushed by the panicked stampede of their neighbors. Every death added another note to the scream. Decimus opened the Vox and spoke into it, letting the choir carry his words across the dying world. "Look up," he told them. "Look at your sky. Those fires are your prayers being answered. You trusted in walls and numbers and the corpse on the throne. You thought you could hide in his shadow. You were wrong." His voice bled into emergency channels, into picked feeds, into the minds of astropaths already driven half-mad by the warp storm building at the edge of the system. "This is the first note," he said. "A single world howling as it burns. There will be others. When Cadia cracks and the gate vomits madness into your soft little empire, remember Helandros. Remember what the 8th Legion carved into your night. Remember that you were already dead, long before the sky fell in." On Bastion Primus, what was left of Vect's staff heard that sermon as they fought and died in the broken corridors. On the surface, men in trenches and under shattered habs heard it as they burned. In orbit, refugee crews heard it as their ships came apart around them. The world of a billion screams answered. The sound rolled up into the void, into the waiting jaws of the eye, and the Night Lords listened and smiled. Helandros did not stop screaming when the guns fell silent. The noise changed, that was all. The roar of macro batteries and the thunder of collapsing hive sections faded, replaced by the hoarser sound of many throats crying at once. The smoke did not thin, it simply drifted into new shapes as the winds shifted, carrying ash and the stink of cooked meat. With open resistance broken, the harvest began. Surviving populations were driven into the open, herded toward whatever open spaces could be cleared in the skeletal remains of the hives. Transit plazas became collection pens. Cargo yards turned into killing fields. Factorum pits, once full of ore and fuel, now filled with men in ragged uniforms and stripped civvies, pressed shoulder to shoulder, faces turned up toward the ragged strips of sky. Night Lords walked the rim of those pits like shepherds examining flocks. Some came in full warplate, steps heavy, bolters slung, chain blades idling at their sides. Others wore lighter armor, plates stripped away to reveal scarified flesh beneath, lightning tattoos twisting along their arms. Mortal enforcers followed in their wake, boots crunching on broken glass, hands white-knuckled on shock mauls and choke leashes. Executions became routine. In one Factrum bowl, a heavy stubber had been set up on a repurposed maintenance crane, its triple barrels already blackened from constant fire. A Night Lord sat behind it like a man at a card table, helm off, pale face spattered with drying blood. He worked the firing grips with almost lazy motions, stitching the crowd with lead whenever they pushed too close to the rim or when boredom moved his finger. Bodies piled in ragged berms at the edges. The pit floor became slick, then marshy. Men slipped and vanished under the press, trampled by the panicking mass. Mortal overseers waded among them with shock mauls and blades, pulling out those who looked too healthy, too defiant, too useful. Those were tagged and led away. Congregation, one enforcer muttered, chalking a crude wing symbol on the back of a chosen prisoner. The Prophet wants thinkers, officers, priests, commissars, any man who once thought he had the right to tell others how to die. The tagged men were marched out in chains, through corridors lined with silent armored giants. Helandros' primary governor's palace had lost its roof somewhere during the opening bombardment. Now it was a skeleton of blackened spires and cracked vaults. In its grand chapel, the stained glass had been pulverized, leaving only jagged teeth of colored shard in the window frames. Sunlight, choked by smoke, came down in dirty shafts that made the suspended dust look like falling ash. Decimus had turned it into a temple fit for the 8th. The floor was slick. Blood had been pumped here in industrial quantities, sluiced in from slaughter pens and execution grounds, poured through grates and channels to flood the wide nave. It lapped at the bases of shattered pillars and pooled around toppled statues of the corpse emperor and his saints, turning marble drapery a dull, clotted red. The air was thick with copper and rot. Chains ran from the ceiling in a forest of iron, each link stained dark. Some held hooks, some ended in shackles, some ended in nothing, swaying gently in invisible currents. In the center of that drowned chapel, on a raised platform that had once been an altar, a commissar screamed. He was a big man, the greatcoat stripped from him now, cap gone, hair plastered to his skull with sweat. His bare chest rose and fell in frantic heaves, skin already striped with shallow cuts where an Astartes-sized blade had tested its edge. His arms were stretched wide, each hand nailed through to a heavy plank of plasteel. His legs were pinned at the ankles, spread, toes just brushing the blood-slick stone. His eyes were fixed on the hololith hanging in the air above him. The projection showed his regiment, men in greatcoats and peaked caps, standing in firing lines before a shattered hab-block, laser guns raised in disciplined arcs. Night Lords came out of the smoke at them, looming shapes in midnight armor, bat-winged helms splitting into hungry grins. Chain blades rose, bolters flared. The thin red lines of last fire vanished under the thicker, meteor blossoms of exploding bodies. The commissar watched himself fail in real time. Every time one of his men broke and ran, he flinched. Every time a Night Lord took a man apart, he jerked against his nails. His throat was already raw from shouting orders into a dead vox. Now he just made broken sounds, half curses, half pleas. Decimus stood behind him, sleeves of his midnight armor bared, gauntlets off. His hands were still metal, augmented bones and reinforced tendons under pale skin etched with Nostraman sigils. They were slick up to the wrists. He held a knife the length of a man's forearm, its edge silver and very clean. "See," he murmured against the commissar's ear. "They stand, they fight, they die well. You should be proud." They, the man coughed, spitting blood. They are not yours to teach," Decimus suggested. He slid the blade down, almost gently, pressing the point into the flesh of the commissar's forearm near the elbow. The man tensed, breaths hitching. Every man who sees a commissar's hat Decimus said softly, knows that you have the right to decide who dies for discipline, who gets a bullet in the back so the line does not break. You have spent a lifetime making those choices, I think. The commissar swallowed. His eyes did not leave the hololith. Now learn how little they meant. Decimus cut. He did not gouge or hack. He drew the knife with the slow, practiced care of someone whittling away at something fragile. Skin parted, peeling back in a neat strip. Muscle opened in red lips. The commissar shrieked, back arching, veins standing out in his neck. Decimus watched the spray of blood with half an eye. The rest of his attention was turned inward. The first scream hit him like a thrown stone. It splashed against the flawed lump of gene seed coiled at the base of his skull and rippled outward, sending concentric circles of sensation through his nerves.
Be sure to subscribe. You know you want to. If you don't, you'll be sent into the void and nobody will find you for the rest of your life. So go, be sure to subscribe. Remember, subscribe.
Behind his eyes, the chapel flickered. For a heartbeat, Helandros vanished. He saw a different sky, black, ruptured by a wound of roiling warp light that bisected it from horizon to horizon. Stars swallowed. Constellations dragged into new shapes. A planet hung. Below that scar, its surface mostly dark, scattered with pockets of flickering lumens. Lightning crawled between hive spires. Banners with the winged skull of the 8th Legion snapped from palace towers. Dropships howled through choking, ash-clogged air. Somewhere, unseen, many voices chanted in a tongue that tasted like Nostramo. The image snapped away as the commissar gulped air for another scream. Decimus pressed the flat of the blade against exposed muscle, just enough to hurt, not enough to cut deeper. Again, he said. He traced the edge along the man's arm, lifting ribbons of skin, exposing the spiderwork of veins beneath. The commissar shrieked once more, voice cracking high. His body trembled. Blood ran down in bright sheets, adding fresher color to the chapel's pool. The visions came thicker now, Cadia falling again and again from different angles. From orbit as the Blackstone fortress struck, from the trenches as the ground heaved and opened, from the bridge of an Imperial cruiser as the shockwave turned the void to boiling glass. He saw the Cadian gate break. He saw the scar tear across the galaxy, worlds snuffed out like candles. He saw ships ripped in half by tides of unreality. He saw whole sectors go dark, their beacon stars swallowed, their names scratched out on star charts and replaced with question marks. He also saw something else, faint at first. Scattered points of stability in the chaos, systems that did not vanish, worlds that did not die. They changed. They drowned in endless night, their stars occluded by the swelling of the Great Rift. They lost contact with the Corpse Emperor's realm. Help never came. Into that vacuum, other powers slid. He saw Night Lords' warbands on those worlds, standing on palace balconies and hive rooftops, armor streaked with blood, lightning motifs rinked with flayed skin. He saw serf populations driven into permanent curfews, their days structured around ritual culls and timed flayings. He saw entire cities built around execution plazas, their architecture rearranged to echo Nostraman letters that spoke of fear and inevitability. An empire, he thought, not of law, of fear. The commissar's breath hitched again. Decimus blinked and came back to the chapel. The hololith above the altar showed the last of the man's regiment breaking under a Night Lord's charge. Lucarifus descended into their ranks like a scythe, jump pack howling, talons tearing men apart in mid-air. He dragged 3 behind him, impaled on hooked chains, their bodies beating against one another as he rose. "You will die," Decimus told the commissar. "Your men will die. Your world will crack. Nothing you believed in will survive what is coming. That is already truth. I am not here to change it. I am here to understand how it happens." He began on the other arm. At the edge of the chapel, Varial watched. The apothecary stood beneath a forest of hanging chains, helm on, medicae, sensors in the armor's gorget active. Green runes danced across his internal display, tracking heart rate, respiration, spike patterns in Decimus's brain activity. He spoke quietly into a Vox channel, half to a servo skull hovering by his shoulder, half to the ship's data stack. Neural activity is elevated well above Astartes' baseline, he said. Fluctuations correlate strongly with external stimuli. The louder and more prolonged the subject's screams, the greater the amplitude of the Prophet's response. He adjusted a dial on the collar of his armor, narrowing the focus of his auspex. Gene seed cluster shows unusual flux, he went on. The deficiency in the Primarch organ is expressing as we have seen before, but with higher intensity. Kurz's curse thrives under sensory overload. The more blood, the more suffering, the more the cortex lights up. Fascinating. The servo skull recorded, Vox bead blinking. Varial's gaze flicked from the runes to the scene at the altar. He watched Decimus work, noting the steadiness of his hands, the lack of wasted motion, the way his eyes sometimes lost focus as visions took him elsewhere. We could, in theory, Varial mused, amplify this further, increase the feedback loop, more prisoners, longer sessions, additional pain stimulus linked to battlefield inputs, turn him into a living auger, a Farsight engine powered by atrocity. He could almost see it. Decimus, enthroned in some repurposed chapel, cables sunk into his skull, surrounded by a ring of living victims whose ongoing torment fed his visions. Around him, a warband that moved according to those visions, always stepping where the stones lay under the river, never into the deep parts. And what happens when his mind breaks? The servo skull asked in a reedy mimicry of a voice Varial remembered from long ago. Then we find another gene seed strain and grow another prophet, Varial said simply. But this iteration still has much to show us. On the surface, Lucoriphus revelled. The hives were ruined now. Great slabs of them had been peeled away by orbital fire, exposing inner levels like the cross-section of a rotten fruit. Streets opened onto sheer drops where other streets had once been. Transit rails hung in mid-air, leading nowhere. Smoke and dust hazed every view. Into that labyrinth, the raptors dived. Lucoriphus led them in laughing, his jump pack howling a murder hymn. They swooped low over crowded alleys, talons reaching, snatching men up from the press like hawks taking rats. Chains dragged behind them, hooks biting into flesh. Bodies jerked off their feet and yanked twitching into the air. For sport, they flew low over the gathering pits, letting the chains drop until the corpses trailing them bounced off heads and shoulders, leaving streaks of blood and tissue across the terrified faces below. Men screamed and clawed at the air, trying to escape the rain of their own dead. Strategic necessity, one of his pack voxed, amused as they banked around a half-collapsed Habspire. Someone will ask for that, back on the ship. A justification, a reason. Lucoriphus laughed, Vox filters turning it into a cracked snarl. Tell them the prophet needed more music. He pulled his chain up, bodies slapping together, then let it out again so the corpses fanned wide like a grisly banner. It is important, he went on, that they understand we do this because it pleases us, not because some War Council spreadsheet told us it was efficient. Above the world, the wider war ground on. Vox traffic carried snatches of it to Helandros like driftwood from a greater wreck. Astropathic screams bled into the scream choir, layering warp-scented panic over the more honest, throat-made sound. Reports came in of fortress worlds falling one by one along the gate. Names that had once meant nothing to anyone outside their own systems were suddenly gravestones. On fleet charts, casualty figures climbed into the billions and then beyond, numbers that meant no more than any other noise to those already drowning in them. The first signs of something worse glimmered at the edge of every augur readout. Warp storms, larger and wilder than anything on record, building around Cadia, feeding on the death and the ritual, on the despoiler's will and the god's amusement. Their edges licked at neighboring routes, twisting navigation beacons out of true, making straight lines crooked, turning safe passages into traps. Some of the lords who had answered the conclave on the corpse moon began to vox. Calyx came first. His voice was tight, controlled, but Varial could hear the stress in it as he patched the transmission through to the chapel where Decimus washed Commissar blood from his hands. "The corridor you spoke of is closing," Calyx said. "Warp storms are flaring on routes that were clear a week ago. My fleet has already lost 2, the frigates to unreality spikes. I have men muttering about prophecy and punishment. You have their ears, Prophet. Tell me where the stones are. Tell me where I can step without losing everything." Decimus sat on the altar's edge, armor plates spattered, helm beside him, hair damp with sweat. "You are in a false calm," he said. "You are in the eye of a storm that will move soon. When it does, everything in that pocket will twist. You must go now, not when your navigators say it is wise. Now." "And where?" Calyx demanded. "Which heading? Which vector? Give me something other than blood and poetry." Decimus closed his eyes. Helandros vanished again. He saw star maps pivoting, routes reconfiguring, currents shifting. He saw a cluster of systems that would remain for a time in the shadow of the rift without being directly swallowed. He saw the patterns of Imperial retreat, the way their fleets would bunch and stumble. He saw opportunities. He opened his eyes. He gave Calyx a heading in old Nostraman terms, using stars that no longer appeared on Imperial charts, markers from a homeworld long destroyed. He translated them into something the other man's navigators could use. He told him which ships to sacrifice in the opening move, which ones would break plague-free through the coming storm. He also saw Calyx's death, not in detail. A flash of his ship's bridge lit by burning consoles, the crack of his spine against a rail, the moment his lungs filled with fire-hot gas. It would come later, when arrogance made him ignore a warning. Decimus kept that part to himself, for now. Others called. Darja ranted, accusing him of withholding glory, of sending him to the wrong battle lines. Toriel spoke in his measured, quiet way, asking for trends, for hints, treating Decimus's visions as one more tactical input rather than a divine command. A few long-range lords spat defiance, accused him of engineering their fates with his words, as if prophecy were a weapon he was turning deliberately on them. He listened. He answered. When they demanded to know what lay ahead, he told some of them, in exquisite detail. "Do not board that ship," he told one. "Its reactor is already singing its death song. You will take 3 steps aboard her deck and vanish in boiling light. Do not trust the astropath with the crooked smile," he told another. "He has already sold you to the Black Legion. Kill him and his patrons will have to improvise." Sometimes they listened. Sometimes they did not. A Night Lord's captain who had been at the conclave heard the Vox traffic and saw the harvest on Helandros and decided he had heard enough. His name was Cairo. His armor was thick with the scars of campaigns that predated the heresy. He had once stood in Kurz's shadow on Nostramo, had watched that world die and called it justice. The prophet was young enough to have been his son and wore another man's face. In the muster, in the bay of the echo of damnation, with lines of Atramentar and gun claws watching, Cairo stepped out of formation and spoke. "This is waste," he said, his voice booming through his helm. "We butcher an entire world's worth of slaves for a vision. We burn a fortress hive for a sermon. Kurz killed to make a point. We kill because a lab-grown whelp has a headache." The bay went quiet. Decimus stood at the head of the formation, cloak hanging heavy, helm in place. His lenses burned. "Step forward," he said. Cairo did, boots ringing on the deck. "You call yourself prophet," the captain said. "You move us like pieces on a board only you can see. You talk of empires built on fear. I see ships without crews, guns without serfs, empty decks where we could have had labor for 10 campaigns. You are throwing away strength to hear yourself talk." Lucarifus chuckled softly from the sidelines. Varial watched without comment, hands folded behind his back, Medicae rune, blinking in quiet interest. "You want a vote?" Cairo went on. "Call one. Let us see how many of the 8th will actually follow you once they are no longer drunk on your theatrics." Decimus dropped from the platform with a hiss of pistons landing lightly on the deck in front of Cairo. "No vote," he said. "Only proof." He drew Aurum. The relic blade whispered from its scabbard, pale edge humming. Cairo's chain blade came up in answer, teeth spitting sparks. Decimus had seen this fight a dozen times already. He saw Cairo's first move before the other Astartes even twitched, a feinted high cut designed to draw his guard up before the real strike darted low for the hip joint. He saw the follow-up, the elbow spike, the attempt to hook and throw. He saw the moment of panic when none of it worked. He moved accordingly. Cairo's chain blade roared across the space where Decimus's helm had been a heartbeat earlier. The Prophet stepped inside the arc, shoulder brushing, the other's pauldron, Aurum, flicking down in a quick, precise stroke that severed the power cable at the rear of the whining weapon. The teeth died with a hungry whine. Cairo tried to change grip, to use the blade as a club. Decimus had already turned. He cut at the knee, not hard enough to sever entirely, just enough to cripple tendon and muscle. Armor parted in a burst of gore. Cairo staggered, one leg buckling. "Waste," Decimus said quietly, almost conversational, as he stepped past. "To let you go on thinking your opinion matters." He took the other knee with the same method, dropping the larger Astartes to the deck. Cairo crashed down on both stumps, growling, trying to swing, trying to rise. Decimus opened him like a surgeon taking apart a cadaver to show an audience how the organs fit. He sliced through one elbow joint, then the other, reducing Cairo's arms to useless lumps of metal and meat. He took his time, letting everyone watching see how little the older warrior could do to stop him. Every desperate jerk, every attempted counter, every blind swing had already played out in the Prophet's mind. He was always a step ahead. By the time he stepped around behind the kneeling captain and hooked his fingers under the edge of his helm, Cairo was a limbless torso braced on ruined stumps, breath coming in ragged snarls. Decimus tore the helm off and dropped it to the deck. Cairo's face was a map of old scars, eyes burning, teeth bared. "You are killing us," he spat, slowly, one world at a time, one warband at a time. "You will lead the Eighth into a dark from which it never returns." "Good," Decimus said. He drove Aurum down through the top of the captain's skull, the blade punching out through his jaw in a fountain of brain and bone. He twisted once for emphasis, then wrenched the sword free. He turned to the watching warband, blood drying on his armor in dark patterns. "This is what defiance of destiny buys you," he said. "A chance to die differently to what I have seen. Cairo chose that. You can too. Or you can listen when I tell you where the stones lie." No one spoke. He looked along the rows of helms and pale, scarred faces. He saw doubt, fear, not of him, not exactly, of the idea that their deaths might already be written down somewhere in someone else's mind. "Helandros is not wasted," he said. "We are not going to rub this world out with a single glorious gesture. Exterminatus is for those who want an easy, clean ending. We are not here for clean endings." He voxed to the bridge. The cyclonic warheads had already been skulking in the launch bays, their machine spirits purring in corrosive anticipation. A single volley would have scoured Helandros from its orbit, turning it into a molten wound that would cool into lifeless rock over centuries. Decimus did not give that order. He gave another. Cyclonic torpedoes dropped in staggered waves, their trajectories plotted, not for maximum annihilation, but for artistic ruin. They struck along fault lines, at plate junctions, in deep ocean trenches. Their warheads dug into the mantle before they blew, cracking the planet's bones rather than pulverizing its flesh entirely. Continents tore, seas turned to steam, boiling off in scalding storms that scoured coastlines. Mountain ranges buckled, peaks becoming molten rivers. Whole hive clusters slid sideways, shearing off their roots and plunging into newly opened chasms. The world did not die. It screamed. Atmospheric dust clouds turned noon into twilight everywhere. The stars vanished, even for those who had once looked up from the highest spires. Weather patterns broke. Storms circled permanently, lightning walking endlessly across skies choked with ash. Pockets of life endured in half-collapsed hive arcs and on stubborn plateaus that escaped the worst of the breaks. Men huddled in the dark, breathing thin, tainted air, drinking whatever did not burn, their tongues waiting for whatever came next. The next thing was the 8th Legion. Raptor hunts kept the surviving districts under constant terror, jump packs snarling through the permanent storm, talons scraping along rooftops. Night Lords' patrols walked the broken streets in loose files, cloaks snapping in the sulphurous wind, bolters carried like the tools of magistrates rather than soldiers. Helandros was no longer a fortress world. It was an altar. In a side chapel of the governor's palace, knee-deep in congealing blood, Decimus knelt. The room had once been small, a place for private devotion. He had knocked out the walls and merged it with adjoining chambers, creating a space big enough to fit his vision. The corpses here were not arranged in Nostroman letters. They were laid in arcs and clusters, pinned to walls and ceilings, floating in the thickening blood in patterns that only made sense from a certain angle. From where he knelt, he could see it. A star map, not of the Imperium as it had been, of what it would become. Each corpse was a system, each cluster a subsector. Lines of stretched intestine and linked limbs marked out warp routes, some intact, some broken. The great rift ran across it all, a jagged gash of bodies torn and twisted, their faces contorted in silent screams. In that map, some points glowed brighter in his mind's eye. Worlds that would become what Helandros now was. Shrines of terror, thrones for petty kings in midnight armor. The nascent empire of fiends he had glimpsed in earlier visions, now clearer, more defined. He felt his gene seed burn. He tasted copper on his tongue. He watched himself from above, an armored shape kneeling in a sea of blood, head bowed under a halo of hanging intestines. Cadia came into focus as if he stood on its surface. He saw the fortress world in its last moments, sky falling in molten fragments, ground tearing itself apart. He saw Cadians still fighting on walls that were no longer attached to anything. He saw Abaddon on a promontory of shattered rock, demon blade raised, warp storms howling around him like wolves. He saw the gate finally break. He watched the scar tear across the map laid out in flesh before him, cutting through carefully arranged limbs, turning planned routes into dead ends. He saw fleets flounder, Imperial and heretic alike, caught in currents neither understood. He saw, most clearly of all, that he was nowhere near any of it. The 8th Legion would not decide Cadia's fate. They could nip at the edges, snap at the flanks, but the great blow had already been aimed and loosed by other hands. The despoiler would have his victory there. The Corpse Emperor's realm would split. His role lay in what happened after. He saw worlds trapped in the dark, cut off from Terra's light, from Mars's industry, from the shrill squabbling of the Senatorum. He saw how fear would bloom there, wild and unchecked, once the old lies failed and the new realities set in. He saw himself walking those worlds, helm under his arm, Aurum at his hip, visions guiding his steps. He saw his own death again, as he had seen it on the corpse moon, high above some nameless altar, impaled upon a throne made of broken Astartes and flayed angels, laughing with his last breath as blood ran down to feed the roots of yet another shrine. He lifted his head. Cadia dies, he said softly. The despoiler wins, the great rift opens, and the Imperium cracks. Blood lapped at his greaves. Hanging corpses swayed gently, as if nodding. I was never meant to stop it, he went on. I am not a savior. I am a gardener. I prune away the futures where the Corpse Emperor's order regrows. I tend the ones where the night never ends. He smiled, a small, tired expression that never reached his eyes. So be it. He rose from the blood, cloak dripping, and turned toward the door. There were worlds to mark, roots to shape, lords to terrify into usefulness. The galaxy was breaking on the despoiler's anvil. It would fall to the 8th Legion's Prophet to make sure that when the hammer blow was done, nothing put the pieces back together again. Cadia died hard, but it died. Across the Cadian Gate, auger platforms and astropathic relays drowned in static and screaming. Fortress moons cracked. Defense forts burned white as their reactors went. The fortress world itself, long held as a promise that the eye would never spill further, broke under the impact of Blackstone like a rotten tooth under a hammer. From a safe remove in the outer currents, the echo of damnation watched it happen. On the main strategium display, Cadia turned slowly, its surface split by glowing wounds. Chunks of crust and mantle peeled away, falling outward in slow arcs. Gun batteries still fired from tumbling fragments, lances stabbing blindly at the dark, even as their own anchors spun through vacuum. Astropathic echoes rolled through, the ship like distant thunder. Decimus felt them more as pressure than as sound. A heaviness behind his eyes, a taste of hot metal at the back of his throat. "The fortress is finished," Varial said. The apothecary's helm was off, his scarred face lit by the pale glow of the hololith. "The gate will not hold without it." "The gate does not matter," Decimus murmured. "Not anymore." He studied the image, seeing more than the others did. Not just the broken world, but the shape of the storm that rose around it. Warp tides bulged outward from the wound, currents that had been stable for millennia suddenly twisting. Navigation beacons flickered, vanished, reappeared in the wrong places. The neat lines on Imperial charts that marked safe routes warped like heated metal. In that chaos, flecks of light scattered. Imperial ships, breaking away from the slaughter around Cadia, tried to flee along routes that had been reliable yesterday and were death traps now. Battle fleets, heavy with wounded and refugees, staggered toward exit vectors that no longer existed in the same place. Convoys rammed into one another as captains panicked and tried to turn. Some vessels translated into the warp on faulty coordinates and were lost at once, snuffed like embers in a gale. It was not retreat, it was stampede. "There," Decimus said, raising one pale gauntlet. Icons bloomed on the display, highlighting clusters of fleeing ships, the ragged beginnings of corridors where the warp had not yet closed its teeth. They run. They must. They are afraid, so they flee. That makes them predictable. Lucarifus lounged in the shadow of a support pillar, helm on, arms folded, jump pack idle. He tilted his head, watching the little motes scurry across the display. "Herd animals," he said. "They see smoke and move away from it. Problem is, the fire is everywhere. And we are the men with knives standing in the only doorway they think they can." "Find," Decimus replied. He turned from the hololith, cloak of stitched skin swaying around his legs, and walked to the center of the strategium. The restraints on his command throne stood open, black metal bands waiting. He ignored them and stepped instead onto the floor sigil, a cracked Imperial aquila that had been hammered flat and overlaid with the flayed wing emblem of the 8th. "Call them," he said. "Those who answered the corpse moon, those who swore in blood and skin. It is time they heard what I have seen for them." The War Council assembled a few hours later, summoned by Kurt, encoded vox bursts that carried his imprint like a scent. They came by hololith and by physical presence, depending on how close their fleets rode to the echo. Calyx appeared as a grainy blue projection, his narrow face and old Mark armor rendered in flickering ghostlight. Toriel the White-Handed strode in person from his docked strike cruiser, gauntlets bone pale against his midnight, blue plate. Other warlords, lesser in reputation or in simple force of will, joined them in a ragged circle. Lucarifus leaned against a bulkhead near the entrance, helmet lenses glowing lazily. Varial stood at Decimus's side with a data slate cradled in one hand, Auspex feeds ticking over his internal display. The strategium's central hollow showed not Cadia now, but the region around it. Warp tides shimmered in false color. Stable routes blinked in and out like nervous eyes. "The despoiler has his victory," Decimus began. His voice carried clearly in the chamber, Vox Disc amplifying it without distorting it. Cadia cracks. The gate vomits madness. The Corpse Emperor's realm splits under the weight of its own rot. No thanks to us, one lord grunted. His armor bore a riot of scratches, his helmet crested with a line of fused vertebrae. He did it with his own toys. We were never meant to decide that battle, Decimus said. Our Primarch looked at the Long War and saw that some blows would never be ours to strike. He understood that sometimes you let another madman swing the hammer while you stand at the edge of the anvil and wait to see what breaks off. And what breaks off here, Calyx said, nodding toward the hollow, is the Imperium's spine. Their roots twist, their beacons go blind, their fleets run without knowing where they are running to. Exactly, Decimus said. Here is where we work. Toriel folded his white hands behind his back. You sent for us to recite the obvious prophet? We can all see ships fleeing. We have all heard the astropaths choke on their own blood trying to describe the storm. Where is your vision in this? Decimus's helm turned toward him slowly. In the futures where you follow the despoiler's commands, he said, you die. Silence dropped heavy. He let it sit for a long, slow heartbeat, letting the words sink their hooks. In almost every path where you throw your ships in after his, he went on, you are meat for his glory. You bleed yourself white in assaults that benefit his narrative, not your own. You become footnotes in other men's sagas, names on the long list of those who died screaming in his shadow. Lucoriphus's lenses brightened with amusement. I do not mind dying screaming, he said. It is the question of whose ears my scream reaches that interests me. You are not entirely wrong, Decimus said. If you crave that kind of end, I will not stop you. You can fling yourselves at whatever fortress he points to next and hope he remembers to mention you when he boasts to his gods. He gestured at the hollow. The fleeing convoys magnified. Wedges of icon clusters, ragged, disordered, all racing along the same few narrowing bands of navigable space. Or you can listen, he said, and choose a different stage. He outlined the corridor, not as it appeared now, a half-formed route, but as it could be shaped. A pocket of relative calm between the worst of the emergent warp storms. A twisting line through shoals of unreality where a skilled navigator could thread their ship if they had the right markers. Imperial captains are herd animals, he said. They will sniff out any path that smells less dangerous than the others and stampede toward it. Their astropaths already feel this corridor as a slight thinning of pressure. They will mark it as safe. They will push their convoys through it, desperate to get away from the corpse fire around Cadia. And you would be waiting, Toriel said quietly, along the edges, on the rocks. Decimus inclined his head. We shape it. We make offers to the things that writhe in those currents. We give them other toys to play with in exchange for leaving this one gap passable. For a little while. Calyx grimaced. You talk of pacts. I talk of bargains, Decimus said. Kurz taught us to see the warp as a weapon, not a god. I will not bow to anything that thinks itself divine, but I will trade with it. I will speak its language and twist its meanings. If I can keep a route open where the Corpse Emperor's navis start to think salvation lies, I can also close it on my whim. One of the lesser warlords snorted. You risk too much with this witch talk. First it is bargains, then it is rituals, then it is kneeling in front of a demonic altar, chanting for favors. We already kneel, Variel observed, voice mild. We kneel to the past, to dead Nostramo, to a Primarch we helped murder by carrying out his design too well. If you count every oath as worship, you are already priests. Rumbling anger met that. That is not the same, the warlord growled. Honoring Kurz is not the same as feeding the warp directly. He hated the gods. He killed in spite of them. Kurz killed to prove a point, Decimus said. He used fear as a tool. That is all I am doing. If I can frighten the Imperium more thoroughly by using a corridor shaped from demonic deals than I can by playing pirate along its edges, I will do it. Purity of belief is a toy for fanatics. Survival and terror are coined for those of us who want to see what the galaxy looks like after the corpse finally stops twitching. He pointed at the hollow again. Here is my wager, he said. I build this corridor and let it be known, quietly, in the way that rumors spread among voidsmen. Captains will fight for priority to get their ships into it. They will drag regiments and refugees and tithes along behind them like ballast. We let that traffic build. We shadow it. We learn its timings. Then, when we are ready, we close the door and cut their throats in the dark. Lucoriphus laughed softly. You are making a trap from hope itself. Yes, Decimus said. That is the only bait worth a damn. Varial glanced at the feeds scrolling along his augmetic interface. We will need markers, he said. Shrines along the corridor. Places where the reality bleed is weaker or stronger. Anchors for your agreements. Lesser entities can be convinced to cluster around such points, drawn by sacrifice. They can be persuaded to lean on the currents just so. They will want payment, Calyx said. They always do. Then we pay them with men who thought they had escaped, Decimus replied. With regiments who thought this corridor was their salvation. With officers who trusted the corpse emperor and his broken maps. Some of the lords nodded slowly. Others scowled. You would tempt fate this way, one spat. We have already seen what haggling with the warp earns those fools in black. They call on gods and get chains. I will not ask for blessing, Decimus said. I will not beg for strength. I will make very specific deals, bound to very specific points. They will break eventually. Everything does. We only need them to last long. Enough to harvest the meat. The arguments raged. Old fractures reopened. Nostraman pragmatists snarled at those who had drifted closer to open devotion over the long centuries. Kurz's name was invoked as justification for both positions. Some saw no contradiction in breaking worlds for gods while still claiming to bear the Night Haunter's mantle. Others spat at any mention of patronage from the warp, calling it weakness dressed up as zeal. Decimus watched them, tasting each outcome before it arrived. He saw which lords would spurn his plan, which would follow begrudgingly, which would become enthusiastic once the first convoys were stripped. In the end, enough agreed. Enough wanted the blood. That was all he needed. The pacts were made in the dark between stars. The corridor he had marked wound through a region of space no sane chart would have recommended even before the gate broke. Dead systems drifted here, their suns long gutted, their planets stripped or shattered by wars so old even the warp's memory of them had blurred. The void was full of ghosts. Decimus stood in a shrine that had never belonged to the corpse emperor. It was an old place, dug into the rock of a nameless asteroid, its walls carved with symbols that were not quite any known faith. Bones were mortared into its construction. Candles made from rendered fat burned in skulls, nailed to the overhead. Lucoriphus hated it. It stinks of need, the raptor said softly, helm turning as if he expected something to peer at him from every shadow. I prefer clean murder. You kill a man, you take his things, maybe you eat him if you are bored. This groveling feels like an unnecessary step. We are not groveling, Decimus said. We are negotiating. Varial adjusted small, blasphemous devices along the shrine's walls, ensuring the wards were correctly inverted, the sigils offset just enough that they would not bind anything too tightly. You argue with the ocean. It still drowns you, he remarked. Best make sure we can swim before we pick fights with waves. They sacrificed navigators first. Warp-touched men already broken by the strain of guiding vessels through the collapsing routes were easy to take. A few were plucked from stray Imperial ships caught on the corridor's edges. One had been bought from a Black Legion captain who did not ask too many questions, his price paid in slaves and gun cutters. They were laid out on the shrine's floor, eyes stitched shut, tongues nailed to their chins. Decimus cut their veins in careful patterns, letting their blood run into channels carved in the stone. The warp listened. It always listened where blood and intent pooled together. He did not praise. He did not kneel. He made offers. Your playthings are many, he told the hungry thoughts that brushed his mind. You have the gate, you have Cadia's corpse, you have the Black Legion's rituals and the prayers of 1,000,000 cultists. This corridor is small, insignificant. Let it be. Hunt elsewhere, and I will feed you better prey when the time is right. There were teeth in the responses, whispers of promises he did not want, offers of power, of visions deeper and stranger even than those his flawed gene seed already gave him. He ignored them. He held to the terms he had set and refused to be drawn. In the end, curiosity worked where greed might not. Lesser things in the warp agreed to lean aside, to let a thin band of relative calm exist between their storms. They were fickle. They would forget. But not at once, not before enough convoys had scented the gap and fled into it. The slaughter began as soon as the corridor filled. Imperial ships came in scattered knots. Troop transports stuffed to the bulkheads with regiments taken off worlds already marked as lost. Munitorum freighters loaded with crates of laser guns and shell stacks. Pilgrim vessels that had been near the gate by chance and now fled. With the rest, their shrines stripped bare for ballast. For each convoy, there were escorts, frigates, destroyers, the occasional light cruiser, its guns already scorched from the fighting around Cadia. They burned toward the far side of the corridor, like men running for the far gate of a burning city. Behind them, warp storms swelled, making every other route look like a death sentence. Ahead, this thin band of comparative stillness beckoned with all the temptation of opportunity. The Night Lords let the first convoys go. Not through mercy, through calculation. They wanted the story to spread. They let a few battered Commodores reach the far edge of the corridor reasonably intact. Those men sent hurried, encrypted messages along whatever lines still functioned, telling any who could hear that they had found a way out. After those first successes, the traffic trebled. That was when the 8th dropped their knives. Night Lords' ships ran without lights or beacons, void shields, hugged tight to their hulls, silhouettes swallowed by the background. They waited where Decimus told them to wait, his mind's eye already having watched each convoy pass by a dozen times. When the marks were in range, the murder began. Boarding torpedoes slammed into lumbering troop ships, ripping ragged holes in their flanks. Assault claws followed, boring into armor like angry augers. The first warning many crews had that something was wrong was the sudden thunder of decompression alarms, the shriek of atmosphere venting into void. Doors blew inward. Night Lords flooded in, bolters roaring, chain blades rattling. Men in flak and carapace armor were flung into bulkheads by the pressure change, then cut down where they lay. Officers who tried to rally were singled out by preternatural preference, their heads taken and their bodies nailed up as warning. Those who made it to the outer hull in time, who managed to get their suits on and throw themselves through emergency hatches before the atmosphere was gone, died just as badly. Unarmored or under-equipped, they found themselves in hard vacuum, lungs freezing, eyes rupturing. Fleeing bodies tumbled away from their dying ships in loose clouds, colliding, bouncing, freezing solid, becoming macabre halos around crippled hulls. Some ships fought back. A squadron of destroyers from a battered battle fleet out of the Cadian system managed to turn as one when the ambush sprung, their captains made of that hard, fatalist iron that made for good war stories. 2 of Calix's escort frigates died under that counterattack, their hulls opened from stem to stern by lance fire. One of Toriel's raiders took a torpedo amidships and folded around the impact, spilling burning fragments into the corridor. Decimus watched their deaths on crisp Auspex readouts, recognizing them as scenes he had already viewed on the corpse moon. The angles matched. The timing matched. Even some of the vox curses he heard dying captains spit were familiar. He did not intervene. Their sacrifice anchored the corridor more firmly in the Imperial mind. News that there was a path out, but that it was dangerous, made it more alluring, not less. Men always thought they could be the lucky ones, the ones who got through where others had not. On a captured battleship near the corridor's midpoint, an old Lord General tried to prove that hope right. The vessel, once a proud spearhead of an imperial fleet, drifted now with its drives chewed, its escorts gutted. Night Lord's ships hovered around it like sharks, their boarding claws already locked to its flanks. The strategium at its heart looked like every other Vect had ever seen, decades before and worlds away. A circular room full of maps and hololiths, walls lined with reliquaries and honor plaques, vox alcoves humming. Now it was a ruin. Fire had gutted half the consoles. Smoke smeared the ceiling. Bodies lay across the plotting tables and slumped in cogitator pits. The armored icons on the walls were blackened, their golden paint melted. The Lord General stood in the wreckage, bolt pistol in one hand, power sword in the other. His hair was white, his uniform torn, his breastplate dented where something heavy had hit him earlier. His aides sprawled around him with their throats open. A knot of stormtroopers remained, armor scorched, visors cracked. They took positions between their commander and the door, barrels steady despite the tremor in their hands. The doors blew in. Night Lords strode over twisted metal and corpse piles, armor streaked with fresh gore. Lucoriphus was among them, helm a leering skull, taloned boots clicking. Atramentar pushed in behind, heavy steps shaking the deck. Decimus came last. He moved as if in no hurry, cloak dragging over ash and blood. The hololiths that still functioned flickered in his lenses, showing the battleship's hull rupturing in slow progress as his warband took it apart. "Stand down," the Lord General said. His voice was hoarse, but steady. "You want my ship? You have it. You want my men? You have already taken most of them. You will not have my surrender." Decimus regarded him. "You have nothing I want but your fear," he said. He raised Malkarian's twin-barreled bolter and fired once. The shot caught one of the stormtroopers in the face, blowing his helmet apart and spraying grey pulp across the officers at his side. The others roared and returned fire, hellguns stuttering. Decimus walked through it. He had seen this fight before. In the shimmer of his visions, he had already watched each stormtrooper die in a dozen small variations. He chose the path that amused him. He sidestepped bullets that had not yet left their barrels. He let one shot kiss the side of his helm, just enough to send sparks flying to make the trooper who had fired it feel a momentary flicker of hope before Decimus turned and killed him. He shot two more through the chest, their armored torsos blowing inward. He closed the remaining distance on the last, with Aurum already coming up, the relic blade cleaving the man from shoulder to hip, armor and flesh parting in a wet cascade. The Lord General fired his bolt pistol point blank. Decimus twisted, the shot blasting a crater in the pauldron instead of his head. He knocked the weapon aside with the back of his gauntlet and leaned in. "Name," he said. The old man bared his teeth. "You do not get it." "You think I will go digging through the registries later?" Decimus replied. "I am not an imperial historian. I want it now. You fought well enough to earn being remembered as something other than meat." The Lord General hesitated. Pride warred with defiance. In the end, the former won. "Gaius Marvin," he said, "Lord General of the 2nd Cadian Expeditionary. That is the name that will be on the reports when they hear I died here." "Good," Decimus said. "Now your men will hear it when you scream." He moved faster than the old eyes could track, opening Marvin's thigh with a sweeping cut that dropped him to one knee without taking the leg entirely. The power sword clattered aside. Decimus kicked it across the room, out of reach. He caught the general by the front of his cuirass and dragged him to the nearest hololith, forcing him to look. It showed the corridor outside as seen from the battleship's sensors. Imperial ships burned. Night Lords' vessels prowled, weapons flashing. Escape pods tried to flee and were swatted aside or scooped up and bracketed for later harvesting. The little icons that represented lives winked out by the hundreds. "You did this," Decimus said quietly. "You chose this corridor. You called your ships into it. You told your captains there was hope here. You gave them my knife." He began cutting. He did not go for the heart or the throat. He worked piece by piece, taking fingers, then hands, then parts. Of arms, keeping Marvin alive and conscious with occasional stabs of painkillers from Varial's medici servos. Every fresh jolt of agony brought another wave of hoarse curses, then pleas, then gasps. The Night Lords in the Strategium watched. Some laughed. Some simply stood in impassive silence, letting the sight soak in. Every one of them felt their own resolve harden. This was what their prophet did to enemies. This was what he would do to them if they disappointed him. When Marvin's voice finally broke for good, when all he could produce were dry, whistling sounds, Decimus ended it with a single thrust through the sternum, pinning him to the hollow table. He left the body there, skewered above the map of the corridor he had tried to save his people with. The harvesting went on. Convoy after convoy entered the engineered gap in the storm and met knives instead of mercy. Some ships were gutted and left to drift as warnings, their crews nailed to the hulls. Others were captured, intact, their corridors soon echoing with lasburn, bolter fire, and the squelch of bodies being driven down into cargo holds and chained. The numbers became meaningless. Dozens of ships, scores, hundreds, millions of men dead outright. Millions more dragged aboard to fill slave decks and future shrines. The corridor darkened with wreckage, a trail of dead metal and frozen meat that would haunt navigation charts for as long as anyone still cared to record such things. Not every Night Lord's warband came out unchanged. A detachment under Darja, always too eager, pushed ahead of the pattern Decimus had set and blundered into an Imperial counterattack at the far end of the corridor. A task force of cruisers and escorts, their captains desperate and angry, had turned to make a stand rather than flee further. Decimus saw it happening in the shimmer of his inner sight before his auspex confirmed it. He watched Darja's flagship take a full broadside to the midsection, its armor blooming outward in molten petals. He watched one of the mutant warlord's pet sorcerers consumed in a miscast ritual as the warp currents he tried to ride turned under him. He did nothing. On the hololith, allied icons winked out. Warband heraldry burned. The scattered survivors screamed over the Vox, calling for aid, accusing him of betrayal even as they died. You could send ships, Varial remarked, eyes on the same display. You have vessels in range, a vector adjustment, a modest burn, and you would be among them before the Imperials can press their advantage. Yes, Decimus said. His lenses did not move from the dying ships. You will not. No, he said. I will not. Varial's jaw tightened. Later, in the quiet of a narrow chapel deck where only the hum of the ship's spine could be heard, the apothecary confronted him. You let them die, he said. You spoke their doom at the corpse moon. You watched it come true and you did nothing to change it. Decimus sat on a cracked bench, helm resting beside him, hands folded loosely over Auram's pommel. Blood still stained his wrists from Marvin's execution. They died well, he said. They died as you said they would, Varial replied. Not because of a fixed fate, but because you guided them into the paths that matched your visions. You moved them like pieces. You sacrifice allied warbands as readily as you do Imperial regiments. They were rivals, Decimus said. They were also useful. Their deaths are more so. Reports will reach the 8th of what happened. Some will say I doomed them. Some will say I predicted their doom and refused to share their fate. Either way, the myth grows. A prophet who always sees true is more valuable than a dozen lords with swollen egos and limited imagination. Varial's eyes narrowed. You are starting to sound like the men in black, he said. You talk of myths and narratives, of saints and martyrs. Kurz wanted to be a warning. The Despoiler wants to be a war god. The Corpse Emperor wanted to be a light. Now you want to be a legend your own legion fears more than it fears anything else. Myths must be fed, Decimus said simply. The Imperium understands that. It builds its saints on piles of bones and pretends that makes the bones sacred. Why should we not do the same? A dead Night Lord who dies following my word is worth more than one who dies chasing his own petty raid. His death adds weight to my warnings. It makes the next warlord more likely to listen when I tell him to step left instead of right. And if you tell him to step right into a bolter volley to make a point, then he dies instructively, Decimus said. Varial regarded him for a long time, expression unreadable. You are becoming something beyond what Kurz intended, he said softly. He wanted his terror to end with him. He wanted his example to burn itself out. You are turning it into a system, a machine. Machines are reliable, Decimus replied. Primarchs are not. The corridor became a charnel house. By the time the warp shifted enough to make it impassable, the damage was done. Dozens of ships had been taken, their crews chained and branded, their hulls stripped or repurposed. Hundreds more had been crippled and left adrift, wreckage to mark the path. Countless millions of men died in the dark, their last breaths freezing in lungs that had never tasted anything but fleet air. The echo of damnation took on so many slaves that whole decks had to be converted into holding pens. Men were packed in shoulder to shoulder, branded with flayed wing sigils seared into their chests. Some were broken down into labor units and assigned to the tech cults. Others were earmarked for future hunts and executions. Varial's terror engines found no shortage of raw material. The scream choirs swelled. There were always more voices to feed into them. Decimus stood on the observation deck, looking out at the corridor's length as the last of the Imperial ships blundered through, too late to understand the full scale of what had been done to them. Outside, the warp storm that would be named the Cicatrix Maledictum began to take shape in earnest, a scar of roiling unreality that stretched from the eye and beyond, cutting the galaxy in two. He watched lightning crawl along its edges, watched whole constellations vanish behind curtains of twisting color. He saw, in that shifting madness, the outlines of the worlds he would claim. The pockets of relative stability where the Imperium's light would flicker but not go out. The places where a terror empire could take root in permanent night. This is it, he murmured, more to himself than to the others on the deck. The moment the long war becomes the only war. Lucoriphus joined him, helm lenses reflecting the storm. Do you see how you die in there? The raptor asked. Yes, Decimus said. High above a world that smells like Nostromo, on a throne made of things I have killed. It will be ugly. It will hurt. There will be laughter. Lucoriphus snorted. Yours? And others, Decimus said. It does not matter. Death is a cheaper coin than fear. I can spend it freely. He turned from the viewing port, cloak catching the light of the rift. This is my wager, he said. The despoiler has broken the corpse emperor's toy. The gods have their storm. The Imperium is bleeding to death in the dark. Between those truths lies a space where we can build something from fear alone. I will lay our lives on that table. I will bet the 8th Legion on the idea that we can always be a step ahead of whatever pathetic attempt at retribution staggers out of that corpse empire, so long as I can see where the stones lie. Varial watched him go, then turned his gaze back to the wound in the sky. Kurz saw a night that never ended and tried to terrify the galaxy into avoiding it, he said softly, to no one in particular. You look at the same night and call it home. The rift boiled on, swallowing the stars. Time under the scar was measured in screams, not in years. The great rift burned across the galactic plane like a wound that refused to close, its ragged lips of warp light vomiting storms into real space. Sectors that had once been a few clean lines on an administratum chart were now scattered pockets of isolation, islands of terrified life bobbing in a sea of howling unreality. In one such cluster of systems, the 8th Legion ruled. They called it many names. The locals, when they dared speak of it at all, whispered of the chain of lanterns, because from their plague-choked streets, they could sometimes glimpse the trails of burning ships crossing the night. The Night Lords, whose banners hung from every palace, simply called it the Empire of Fiends. Former imperial worlds knelt under midnight, sigils. Old Aquilus had been hammered flat, their wings broken and twisted until they resembled insects pinned to walls. In their place, flayed skin banners bearing the winged skull of the Eighth cracked in the ever-present winds. Curfews were not laws, but survival instincts. On every world, sirens wailed long before sunset, driving citizens into habs and shelters, slamming doors, killing lights. Being outside after dark meant becoming part of the landscape. On some worlds, the Eighth ruled openly. Night Lords walked palace corridors in full warplate, boots leaving rust-red prints on polished stone. Mortal governors, kept alive as useful tools, wore collars that choked them at a vox command. Public squares had been converted into arenas, their old monuments toppled and replaced with iron gallows and execution pits. Every morning, the citizens of those worlds woke to new bodies hanging from towers or impaled on pikes along the main thoroughfares, their flensed faces turned toward the rising sun as a reminder that the night would come again. On others, the Eighth ruled like a sickness. There, the Night Lords rarely showed themselves. Instead, rumours moved through the underhives and the hab blocks. Voices over commandeered vox lines told stories of men taken in the dark and returned as bloody warnings. Wards and sigils painted on walls by trembling hands begged the night haunters' ghosts for mercy. Entire districts vanished into silence overnight, doors left open, meals half-eaten on tables, no sign of where the inhabitants had gone. Over it all, Tenebrae Primus loomed. Helandros had been its imperial name once. Now the fortress world was broken almost in half, its crust split by cyclonic fire, its seas boiled down to poisonous fog banks and shallow, steaming lakes. Great rifts scarred its continents, jagged canyons that oozed molten rock and swallowed whole hive stacks when the ground shuddered. The sky was never fully dark. Ash clouds choked the atmosphere, turning the sun into a dim smear that hovered eternally just below the horizon, painting everything in a bruised twilight. Permanent storms prowled across the face of the world, thunder muttering, lightning stroking the shattered hive spires. Contrails striped that sullen sky, white scars from constant raptor patrols and shuttle flights. Fields of corpses hung between the tallest towers like harvests left out to dry. Lucoriphus had ordered those. At his command, the tops of certain spires had been webbed with chains, from which hung long rows of bodies on hooks driven through ankles and heels. Some were old and desiccated, skin drawn tight over bone, clothes rotted to scraps. Others were fresh, glistening, still dripping onto the streets below. Every man who looked up to make sure a raptor flight was not hunting his block saw those corpses. Every man who tried to pretend life could be normal on Tenebrae Primus knew better by the time the sirens wailed each evening. The hives themselves existed in a perpetual state somewhere between siege and festival. Curfew patrols marched the streets in boots and flak, their shock mauls humming, their faces hidden behind iron masks shaped like screaming skulls. Vox speakers in every hab pump rattled with scheduled broadcasts. Casualty tallies from other worlds in the chain, announcements of new quotas, sermons on the necessity of fear. Every few hours, the loudspeakers recited the terror edicts of the prophet, each line ending with the same phrase: "Remember Nostramo." It was on Tenebrae Primus that Decimus made his capital. The old governor's palace had not survived the bombardment intact. Whole wings were gone, peeled away like flesh from a bone. He left it that way. The broken edges were shored up just enough to stop further collapse, then left jagged, a reminder that this was not a place of comfort, but of sharp truths. From the highest surviving balcony, he could look out across the gutted hive and see the new order written in blood and smoke. Raptor contrails stitched the air in looping patterns as Lucoriphus's packs hunted. Searchlights raked across hab block facades, catching men who had misjudged the curfew and sending them scuttling for cover. Down at street level, the lights of torch columns marked out marching routes as mortal enforcers dragged new victims toward the pits. Behind and beneath that balcony, the flesh industry churned. Varial's torture hives were the beating heart of the new regime. They sprawled through what had once been manufacturing levels and storage warehouses, now converted into chambers of meticulous brutality. Processing lines moved not ore or promethium, but chained, branded bodies. In one such hive, ranks of men shuffled forward in narrow cages, their hands locked above their heads. Each cage led to a machine, part augmetic, part demon, its teeth glistening, its blades very clean. At the first station, fear was taken. Needles slid into arms, necks, skulls. Marcus patterns recorded pulse rates, hormone surges, neural spikes. Men were shown images on flickering screens of their families flayed, their cities burning, their gods ignoring them. Their terror responses were coded, distilled, broadcast along cables to astropathic nodes that amplified them into the ether. On other worlds in the chain, people woke from dreams they could not remember with their hearts pounding and the taste of Tenebrae Primus's scream in their mouths. At the second station, flesh was taken. The machines there cut away specific parts with surgical precision, muscles rich in particular chemicals, organs that could be rendered down into stimulants, blood fractions that reacted well with Astartes' physiology. These were collected in 100 different vials and tanks, labeled with numbers that only Varial and his closest assistants understood. Combat drugs flowed from those vats, potent enough to send a man into battle with his nerves singing and his pain receptors dead. Sustenance slurries filled the bellies of slave crews and ship serfs, tasting like metal and old salt. New Vitae brews tweaked Astartes' metabolism in pleasing ways, shaving reaction times, bolstering resilience. At the third station, nothing was wasted. Those whose fear had been harvested and whose useful parts had been taken were pulped. Bones crushed, meat ground, fat rendered. The slurry that resulted fed both industrial vats and the more vulgar needs of the Legion. On Tenebrae Primus, cannibalism was no longer a whispered taboo, but a logistical reality. Varial supervised all of it with the detachment of a man running an experiment. He walked the gantries above the torture hives, helm lenses bright, fingers ghosting over data slates handed up to him by blood-slicked assistants. He adjusted settings, redirected flows, authorized the construction of new branches when throughput lagged behind his projections. He did not smile. He did not frown. This was work, necessary work. Fear output from this sector has dipped, he noted one day, tapping a section of a wall-mounted schematic with a blood-stained finger. The men processed here are becoming numb. Repetition dulls the response. His under-adept bowed. We have been taking heavily from the same district's apothecary. The citizens are depleted. Then we must replenish, Varial said. Send a request to Lucarifus. Tell him I need a fresh harvest from the eastern Hab arc. Something dramatic. Panic spikes make the best base stock. In the nights that followed, the eastern arc burned. Lucarifus rode the storms above it, raptor packs spreading around him in a loose, predatory formation. Their jump packs painted bright scars across the clouds. Below, sirens wailed as enforcers tried to push everyone inside before the hunt reached full speed. It did not matter. Lucarifus gave a simple order over his vox. Quota. Every district on Tenebrae Primus had a terror quota. A certain number of arrests, floggings, public executions, and spontaneous disappearances required each cycle to keep the people properly afraid. Some local administrators met those quotas with grim efficiency, applying cruelty like a tax. Others tried to cheat, to fudge the numbers, to pretend that a few staged punishments could substitute for real fear. Lucarifus enjoyed dealing with the latter. He led his pack down in a shrieking dive, talons extended. They struck the roof of a civic hab block like a hammer blow, shattering plasteel and concrete, dropping into the rooms below in a rain of debris and dust. Men in those rooms died before they even knew what was happening. Raptors tore through walls, chain blades howling, bolters barking at close range. They dragged survivors out onto balconies and threw them off, laughing as bodies pinwheeled through the smoky air to burst on the streets far below. Others they hooked to trailing chains, leaping off the edges and letting their packs swing them in wide arcs, the corpses whipping around behind them to batter against Hab facades. Panicked crowds surged in the streets, the press of bodies filling every open space. Shots fired into the air only made them run faster, tripping, stumbling, crushing one another. Lucarifus and his pack swooped low over those stampedes, talons snatching at heads and shoulders, lifting victims up and letting them dangle for a few seconds before dropping them again into the crush. By dawn, that slice of the Hive was a maze of smashed doors and blood-streaked walls. The terror quota rose. Varial's charts adjusted. The Empire's engine turned. Into this carefully cultivated nightmare walked a man in black and gold. The Black Legion warship that bore him to Tenebrae Primus did not come skulking. It arrived in-system with full drives, its prow adorned with a demon's face, wrought in metal and bound in runes. It made no attempt to hide its approach. Its vox hail carried the Warmaster's sigil and the coded phrases that meant this was not a simple raid or a favor. This was a call to account. Decimus received the news on the palace balcony. He watched the warship's icon crawl across the local auger display and felt the faint stirring of threads already touched in his visions. He had seen something like this before. Not the particulars, but the shape of it. A man bearing Abaddon's colours, believing he could stride into a Night Lord's dominion and command obedience. Of course he sends someone, Lucarifus said, standing at the railing, helmet tucked under one arm. The permanent storm wind tugged at his scarred scalp. We have been very loud. The despoiler does not like other men telling stories while he is trying to make his own. Then we will give his emissary something to report, Decimus replied. He chose the arena for the meeting. It had been built in the shadow of the palace, carved into a collapsed hive district, where rubble and bone already lay thick. Pyramid stacks of skulls ringed the fighting pit, each pile mortared together with dried blood. Flayed banners bearing the 8th Legion's sigil hung from iron poles, snapping in the hot, corpse-scented wind. When the Black Legion Thunderhawk settled on the arena's lip, throwing dust and ash into swirling columns, the stands were already full. Night Lords lined the tiers, armor a patchwork of marks and patterns, helms off in many cases to show pale, scarred faces. Mortal enforcers and chosen slave witnesses filled the lower levels, pressed tight under the guns of their masters. Vox units had been rigged along the rim, their cables running back to the tower stacks, ready to carry sound and image to every world in the chain of lanterns. The ramp dropped. The emissary emerged in ornate Terminator plate, black as hunger, trimmed with gold. A horned helm crowned his head, its visage carved into a sneer. Chains draped from his shoulders, each bearing a different trophy. The skull of a loyalist Astartes, the mask of a slain inquisitor, the cog-toothed emblem of a Mechanicus Magos. His retinue followed. Chosen warriors in the same black and gold, their weapons polished, their movement measured. They looked around at the skull stacks and the flayed banners with the polite disdain of men who had seen worse and done worse. Decimus waited for them in the center of the pit. He wore no extra finery. His armor was the same midnight ceramite patched from many sources, the same broken aquila hammered flat on his breast. Aurum hung at his side. Malcarion's twin-barreled bolter rode his other hip. His cloak of stitched skin stirred in the wind. The emissary stopped a few meters away. "Decimus," he said, his vox carrying his voice in a cold, amused baritone. "Prophet of the 8th Legion. You make a great deal of noise for someone who owes his existence to another man's legend." "Black Legion," Decimus replied. "You make a great deal of demands for men who owe their existence to another man's failure." A low murmur ran through the Night Lords in the stands. Lucarifus's laughter crackled over the local voxnet. The emissary tilted his helm. "You know my name?" he asked. "No," Decimus said. "I know your type. The Warmaster's creatures all smell the same. You were there at Cadia. You were there when the gate broke. You think that gives you the right to walk where you like and tell those who did their work elsewhere how to spend their blood." The emissary's retinue shifted minutely, weapons flexing. "I am Karaz Draken," he said. champion of the Black Legion, voice of the despoiler in this portion of the void. You hold several worlds that were once part of the Corpse Emperor's realm. You have carved out a petty kingdom in the shelter of the rift. Impressive in its way. Now you will bend that little empire to the War Master's will, as is proper, or you will see it ground down and distributed to those who know how to use such resources. Decimus stood very still. The skull pyramids loomed around them. The flayed banners snapped. The wind moaned through the broken stone. "I will not kneel," he said. "Not to gods. Not to men who think they are gods. Not to men who wear the colors of men who tried and failed to be gods." "This is not a request," Karaz Draken replied. "Abaddon allows his hounds some freedom so long as they bite where he points. You have been biting loudly in the wrong places. Your corridor harvests cost him ships he would have preferred to die on other battlefields. Your empire of fear draws attention that should be on his crusades. These things need to be corrected." Decimus's lenses dimmed slightly as he considered. "You want tithes," he said at last. "Bodies, ships, raids coordinated according to your schedule. You want me to become another line item in your strategium. Here are the Night Lords. They will kill this many and drag this many away on this date." "Yes," Karaz Draken said bluntly. "You can continue to amuse yourself within the limits set. The War Master has use for fear. He does not hate your methods, only your timing." Decimus raised one gauntleted hand and turned slowly on the spot, taking in the arena. The skulls, the banners, the thousands of eyes watching. "Listen," he said, and his voice carried, lifted by hidden amplifiers, washed into every Vox unit that had been rigged to hear. "I have no quarrel with the Despoiler's war," he said. "Let him burn as much of the Corpse Emperor's empire as his blackened heart desires. Let him stack his trophies to the sky and howl his victory to his gods. I care little. All wars end. All crusades exhaust themselves." He turned back to the emissary. "What I care about," he went on, "is what is left when his banners are torn and his story is over. Our father saw a night that never ended. He wanted the galaxy to fear it enough to avoid it. He failed. Talos saw the same night and tried to warn the Eighth. He died for it. I see that night and embrace it." He spread his hands. "So here is my offer," he said. "I will not kneel. I will not paint my armor in your colors or chant the War Master's name as if he were anything but another murderer with a large knife. I will, however, continue to do what I do best. I will make the Imperium afraid. I will break worlds in ways that mean they never truly stand up again. My empire will provide fear and bodies, and the occasional raid where it pleases me to let your pawns think I march beside them." Karaz Draken laughed, short and harsh. "And what does the War Master receive in this generous arrangement?" "A knife in the dark pointed away from his spine," Decimus said. "He is not a fool. He knows the Eighth are more useful as an uncontrolled storm than as a leashed cur. If he is wise, he lets my empire grow. If he is not, he will have to find out how difficult it is to crush men who have already seen how they die and are not frightened by it." The emissary took a step closer, armor plates grinding. "You overestimate your importance," he said. "You are a regional nuisance, a flicker on the edge of the main story. Abaddon writes scripture with every fortress he topples. You scribble graffiti on the walls in the alleys. You will serve, or you will be scrubbed off." He lifted his hand. In the stands, some Night Lords tensed. Weapons twitched. Varial's lenses narrowed as he watched, auspex ready. Decimus smiled inside his helm. He had seen this gesture hours ago in the quiet of his throne room, when he had let his mind drift along the possible paths. He had watched Karaz Draken raise his gauntlet, watched the signal pass to his retinue's internal vox, watched the Black Legionnaires reach for hidden charges and concealed blades, intending to make their own demonstration on his soil. He had also watched another version of this moment, where the arena floor split first. He had chosen that one. "Now," he said over a private channel, Charges buried beneath the skull pyramids and the sand-packed arena floor detonated as one. The world turned white. Shrapnel and bone fragments scythed through the ranks of the Black Legion retinue, shredding ceramite, punching through flesh. Several of the Chosen were hurled bodily into the air, limbs spinning away from torsos, armor cracked open like eggshell. Karaz Draken himself was thrown sideways, his Terminator plate absorbing the worst of the blast, but still buckling at the joints. He crashed into the pyramid beside him, scattering skulls, then rolled to his hands and knees, Vox sputtering. Half the arena floor dropped. Great segments of packed earth and bone collapsed into prepared pits below, their sides lined with spikes and jagged rebar. Half of the emissaries, warriors vanished into those holes, their screams cut short by the sounds of rending metal and ripping flesh. Night Lords in the stands howled with delight. Decimus walked through the settling dust, Aurum already in his hand. He stepped around a writhing Black Legionnaire whose lower body had been left behind in the collapse, armor trailing coils of intestine, and kicked the man into the pit. Karaz Draken tried to rise. Decimus reached him in 3 long strides and stamped on his outstretched hand. Fingers shattered under his boot. Bones popped. The emissary's snarl became a grunt of pain. "You walked into my world," Decimus said, leaning down. "You thought the story was about you because you have been standing near a louder man for too long." He drove Aurum down through the Black Legionnaire's knee, pinning that leg to the broken stone. Karaz Draken roared, gauntlets scrabbling for purchase. Decimus switched his Vox channel to wideband. "Citizens of the Chain of Lanterns," he said. And now his voice went out across Tenebrae Primus and every other world in his reach, echoing in plazas and hab corridors, crackling through battered Voxcasters. "This man speaks for the War Master. He thinks that makes him safe. Watch how safe he is." He took his time. He did not need the man's fear for prophecy. This was not about visions. This was about message. He cut Karaz Draken apart under a sky choked with ash, surrounded by skulls and banners, under the eyes of billions. He took limbs at the joints, separated faceplate from helm, peeled back armor to show the pulped, twitching meat beneath. Every scream, every gurgle, every curse in the despoiler's name was carried on the Voxnet, piped into homes and barracks and slave pits. When there was finally nothing left worth cutting, he rammed Aurum through the champion's chest and nailed what remained of him to a blackened pillar at the arena's edge. "This is what becomes of those who walk into my empire and forget whose night this is," he said softly. The Black Legion warship left soon after, its guns silent, its engines bright with something that smelled very much like anger. It did not fire. It did not stay. Word spread faster than any ship. Rumors came with it. Whispers in the slave pens, murmurs among the mortal officers, grumbled curses in Astartes' Vox channels. Some Night Lords disliked the attention. Some thought provoking the War Master was madness. Some, who had once thought of Decimus as a useful tool, began to wonder if he was becoming something more dangerous than any foe. Plots began to ferment. They did not last. One night, if the permanent twilight could be called that, the sirens that usually signaled curfew were silent. Instead, the city loudspeakers carried a simple phrase, repeated in flat metallic tones. "Stay in your hab. Do not look out of your windows. This is not for you." Men disobeyed. Of course they did. Curiosity was one instinct fear could not entirely smother. They saw lights moving in the sky that were not search beams. They saw thunderhawks and gunships flit between towers in tight formations, their nav lights extinguished, their engines muffled. They heard distant bolter fire, the dull thump of shaped charges, the crack of armor giving way. In the morning, certain names were spoken in the past tense. Captains who had grumbled loudly about the Prophet's arrogance were found nailed to their own war room walls, their tongues cut out and stitched to their breastplates. Sergeants who had whispered mutiny in barracks were dragged from their beds and flayed in front of their squads, their skins turned into fresh banners overnight. A small ship that had been quietly being prepared for a reassignment was found adrift outside the ring, its crew crucified along its spine. The message was clear. Every plot the dissenters had thought of, Decimus had already seen. Every meeting place had been foreseen. Every coded phrase had been heard in his mind before it ever reached a vox. "I do not forbid dissent," he said in a later address to his assembled officers, armor dripping from a recent purge. "I encourage it. It lets me see who lacks the imagination to do anything but repeat old mistakes. Those men do not belong in my future." Tenebrae Primus's main plaza was not designed to hold billions, but it did its best. Every open space within sight of the palace had been cleared of rubble and corpses for once, leaving a wide, scarred basin of cracked stone. Tiered walkways and collapsed buildings around it were packed with bodies, men crammed together shoulder to shoulder, eyes turned toward the palace balcony. Above them, on every working screen and hollow emitter, the same image waited. The balcony doors, closed for the moment, flanked by guards in midnight armor. When they opened, silence fell like a dropped curtain. Decimus stepped out. He wore his helm for this, the skull face and bat wings rising above a cloak of stitched skins. Lightning bolts crawled faintly across his pauldrons. Aurum hung at his hip, freshly polished. The broken aquila on his chest seemed almost to squirm under the harsh lumen light. Ranks of night lords stood behind him on the balcony, lines of midnight and bone, weapons cradled. Variel was there, hands folded behind his back, lenses dim. Lucoriphus leaned on the balustrade, arms folded, helm under his arm, eyes bright. Decimus raised one hand. "Men of Tenebrae Primus," he said, the vox amplifying his voice until it rolled across the plaza like thunder. "Men of the Chain of Lanterns, men who have survived the fire when other worlds burned clean. Hear me." He let the words settle. He let them feel the weight of being addressed as survivors, even though he had been the fire. "You were once the emperors," he said. "You carried his symbols. You bled for his generals. You trusted his saints and his priests when they told you that the light of terror would never fail." A low, bitter hiss moved through the crowd. Many had lost their families when that light had, in fact, failed entirely to protect them. "Look at your sky," Decimus went on. "There is no light there now, only the scar, the cicatrix maledictum, the great rift. Names for the fact that the corpse on the golden throne finally choked on his own arrogance and tore his empire apart." He paused, head tilting slightly, lenses sweeping over the mass of faces below as if he could see each one individually. "Our father saw this coming," he said. "Conrad Kurz, the Night Haunter. He walked your hive worlds like these before you were born. He carved his warnings into the flesh of Nostramo and the skulls of its nobles. He wanted the galaxy to be so afraid of the night, he saw that it would do anything to avoid it." He gestured out toward the stormlit horizon. "Look how well that worked," he said, dryly. "The night still came. You stand in it now." He took a breath. "Talos Valkoran saw it too," he said. "The Soul Hunter, the last true prophet of the 8th Legion before the Long War swallowed his name. He was killed for the things he saw, torn apart on a world that thought itself important. His visions went with him into the dark for a time. They did not die." He tapped the side of his helm, above the temple. "They live here now," he said. In the flawed meat the apothecary grew from his stolen gene seed. In the same curse our Primarch carried. I am not Kurz. I am not Talos. I am what they become when their warnings are ignored and their lessons are learned correctly." The words rolled out over the plaza, heavy with iron conviction. "I do not use fear as a threat to avert some imagined doom," he said. "I use it as mortar, as chains, as the bricks of an empire that will outlast the despoiler's crusades and the corpse emperor's wheezing. I do not ask you to hope. Hope is a lie that kept you docile while your betters played at immortality." He leaned forward slightly, hands resting on the blood-stained stone. "I offer you clarity," he said. This is what the galaxy is now, a place where night has fallen and will not lift. Here, under my rule, you know what is required of you. You fear me and my legion properly, and you live. You pretend to be brave, you whisper of rebellion, you harbor loyalty to a dead throne, and you die very loudly and very publicly so that others learn from your mistake. He let the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. We are the 8th Legion, he said finally. We were born in darkness. We breathed Nostramo's air when your sun was still fat and bright. We do not fear the night. We are its teeth. Kurz showed the galaxy what it should run from. Talos tried to tell the 8th what it could not escape. I am their perfected continuation. I will walk the future they saw, and make sure it cannot be undone. He straightened. You can kneel to that, he said, or you can kneel to nothing and hope the next world you wake on is kinder. There is no third path. Slowly, as if dragged by invisible hooks, men in the plaza began to drop to their knees. First a few scattered, broken individuals, then more, then whole blocks of the crowd, huddled masses subsiding into a sea of bowed heads. On the balcony, Lucarifus watched with a wolf's grin. Saint Decimus, he said privately, Voxlink dry. The Imperium has its martyrs. We have ours. Saints are dead, Varial remarked. Give it time. Later, when the plaza had emptied and the executions of those who had refused to kneel had been scheduled, Decimus walked alone through the spine of the echo of damnation. The warship rode high above Tenebrae Primus, its massive silhouette a floating omen. The observation deck at its crown offered a view not just of the broken world below, but of the rift itself, the great scar stretched across the distant starfield. He stood before the armor glass, helm off, letting the sickly light of the warp wash his pale features. His reflection hovered in the glass, a young face overlaid with the ghostly image of a skull as the flickering illumination caught on the surface. He let his eyes unfocus. The familiar pressure built behind them, the taste of copper rising at the back of his throat. Threads of possible futures brushed against his mind, each one a different path of blood and ruin snaking out from this moment. He saw worlds burning, as he always did, cities whispering his name in terrified litany before the drop pods hit. Night Lords' banners hanging from statues that had once borne the Emperor's likeness. He saw the empire of fiends grow, tendrils of influence wrapping around more isolated systems, terror empires sprouting like poisonous fungi wherever the rift's shadow sat heavy. He also saw his own end again, a throne, if it could be called that, made not from gold, but from welded plates of ceramite and bone. Broken Astartes armor pieces fused into a jagged seat, flayed angels nailed up behind it in mockery of stained glass, their wings spread wide, their eyeless faces turned down. He saw himself impaled upon that throne, Aurum driven through his chest and into the metal beneath, his armor split open, his cloak of skin burned away. He saw hands, he could not tell if they were loyal or not, nailing his limbs in place so that he would die upright. He heard his own laughter, ragged and wet, echoing off the walls of a shrine lined with skulls. He tasted his own blood as it filled his mouth and ran down his chin. He felt the moment his heart stopped. He watched himself die, and the world he died on kept screaming long after his breath had gone. He blinked. The vision left a ringing behind his eyes, like the aftermath of artillery. He laughed softly, the sound startling in the quiet, of the observation deck. Of course, he murmured. Of course, that is how it ends. A true prophet, he thought, did not see a fate like that, and turn aside to seek something gentler. A true prophet walked toward the death he had seen, making sure he left enough fear behind him that it mattered. He turned away from the window. Bridge, he voxed. Prepare the fleet. We have been still too long. There are more worlds in this dark than the ones already screaming my name, and I find the silence offensive. The acknowledgements came back at once. Engine cores stirred. Gun crews woke from half-sleep. Slaves were driven from pen to station, collars sparking. In the hangar decks, raptor packs checked fuel lines and blade teeth, eager. Decimus walked back toward his throne. The night outside the hull seethed, endless and hungry. He smiled into it like a man greeting an old friend, and the Empire of Fear moved to make more of the galaxy match its master's dreams.